Chapter 8:33. The light in the hall was splendid, illuminating the glazed floor in a dazzling and colorful light. Lin Hongyuan was situated within it, as if it was the pure glazed world recorded in Daoist scriptures. She wondered if she should do the same after returning to the Dragon Palace. Yuqi Nyochuan drank absent-mindedly, the corner of his eyes constantly glancing at the outer corridor. The sky was dusky, and there were no lanterns hanging there. She hesitated whether or not she should find an excuse to see him. When she raised her wine cup, she sniffed it and hurriedly turned to look at the outer corridor, wanting to stand up. Lin Hongyuan gently tugged on Yuqi Nyochuan's sleeve. The latter's face was full of anxiety, saying that he had smelled blood. After hearing this, Lin Hongyuan's thoughts turned rapidly. With that young devil's unfathomable skill and cultivation, even if there were crouching tigers and hidden dragons in Snow Manor, the number of experts that could injure him could be counted on one hand. Xielingzhen counted as one, and Li Yibai counted as half. However, other than the two tremors in the outer corridor, there was no other movement. Could it be that someone was hiding at the bottom of the lake, treacherously ambushing Su Fengnian, and then retreating after succeeding? Otherwise, it was impossible for that guy to be idle and use his flying sword to kill the fish in the lake, bringing out the smell of blood. Lin Hongyuan's curiosity was also piqued. After hesitating for a moment, she gave Yuqi Nyochuan a look, and they both stood up and walked towards the outer corridor. The night gradually darkened, as if an immortal in the heavens had thrown a black cloth to the earth. Fortunately, the hall and the outer corridor were connected, and the candlelight and glazed light flowed out like fertile water. The scene in the outer corridor swayed with the light of the candlelight blowing over the lake's surface. Su Fengnian could vaguely be seen sitting upright on a chair, gently twisting his wrist. Lin Hongyuan's eyes were sharp, and she saw that there was a piece of cotton cloth tied around his wrist. Yuqi Nyochuan anxiously asked, "How did you get injured?" Su Fengnian played it down. "The ground was slippery, and I accidentally fell." Yuqi Nyochuan cried out in surprise, his face full of guilt. Lin Hongyuan sighed inwardly. If this elder sister was thrown into the Jianghu, she would be eaten by those wolves, tigers, and leopards in human skin. Su Fengnian stood up and said with a smile, "Let me send you off. There are all kinds of people in the manor right now, and I'm worried about the two of you." Fairy Lin had previously told her that the founder of the Dragon Palace said that one may know a person's face but not his heart. Although most of the people who entered the Quickie Snow Mountain Villa were righteous people, they might be hypocrites, not to mention those Jianghu people who were both righteous and evil. "Let's take a stroll around the manor and enjoy the scenery while we're at it." "Oh right, I need to disguise myself first. Please wait for a moment." Lin Hongyuan sneered in his heart. A hypocrite? Su Fengnian turned around and covered his face with a root-like mask. After turning his head, he had already turned into an elegant scholar. Yuqi Chaochuan's mouth was slightly agape. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard from inside the house. When Manor Lord Yuqi Liangfu saw that his daughter was safe and sound, he was obviously relieved of a heavy burden. However, he still pretended to be indifferent and said with a smile, "If father's guess is correct, they came here by boat? Chaoquan, how can you greet a distinguished guest like this? Only young Palace Lord Lin is experienced and knowledgeable and won't lower himself to your level." Yuqi Chaoquan smiled and ran to Yuqi Liangfu's side, affectionately calling him father. Yuqi Liangfu lowered his head and glared at her. Then he quickly raised his eyes and smiled at the young white-haired scholar. Even with a warm smile, the way he looked at his daughter was completely different. Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and bowed respectfully. "The Dragon Palace's Li harvesting official is honored to meet Manor Lord." Lin Hongyuan explained with a smile, "Zhuojing is Mr. Nalin's favorite student. People outside of the Southern Tang sect may not be familiar with young Master Zhua. When he first entered the Dragon Palace, we intended to let him choose a position. However, young Master Zhua had a strange eye and chose a Li harvesting official who was not as good as the Imperial Censor official. He said that the saying of harvesting pearls was more pleasing to the scholars who aspired to win the Imperial examination. Sister Yuqi and I have been drinking for about an hour. Young Master Zhua was only focused on being our door god. Sister Yuqi still has more face. The iciness in Yuqi Liangfu's eyes melted and immediately turned a bit warmer. Indeed, the title of Mr. Nailan was too high and unreachable for the people of Liang. He was the #1 person in the southern Tangdao, not just in name but also in reality. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was Nailan Yusi rather than Zhao Bing, the prince of Yanqi. Even under the eyes of Zhao Bing on the southern border. How many times had Mr. Nailan overstepped his authority? Otherwise, when the vassal kings entered the capital, Nailan Yusi would not have taken the carriage and the king of Yanqi would not have acted as the escort knight. If Sui-Jing was really Mr. Nailan's disciple, then Yuqi Liangfu valued him even more than Lin Hongyuan, the young palace lord Lin, who was in an awkward position. Yuqi Liangfu cupped his fists and said softly, "There was an accident in the manor, but since young Master Zhua is by my daughter's side, Liangfu can rest easy. After dealing with the matters at hand, Liangfu will apologize to young Master Zhua and have a good drink." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "I don't dare to disobey." Yuqi Liangfu left the courtyard and shook his head to the old steward who was waiting at the door and said, "Yuchuan is fine. We met a young man named Sui-Jing." Lin Hongyuan said that he was Nailan Yusi's disciple. But even if the Dragon Palace made a move this time, it was only directed at Qiaodong Mountain. Moreover, the Dragon Palace absolutely did not have the strength to kill Li Huoli and Xianxia. How could the Dragon Palace, which is located in a corner of Nanjiang, shake the power behind these two people? If it was really Mr. Nailan's shocking plan, even if it was really the Dragon Palace's doing, it was not something that the Quick Snow Manor could intervene in. We, the people of Jianghu who have no one to rely on in the imperial court, could easily be destroyed. Chapter 8:34. The old steward was deeply worried. I really can't think of anyone with such skill and courage. Although Xianxia did not appear in the martial arts competition, she is still a top-notch master. The Spring Invitation Cottage is also connected to the new Minister of War. Li Huoli's skills are probably average, but with the imperial court as a life-saving talisman, who would dare to make a move? I'm afraid that if the manor does not handle this properly, it will be hard to avoid the wrath of various powers. There will be many who will take advantage of the situation to fish in troubled waters and add insult to injury. Manor Lord must think of a way out. The king of Jing and has always wanted Quick Snow Mountain Villa to rely on the Wang family. Manor Lord, do you agree? Yuqi Liangfu's expression was complicated, and he was unable to decide what to do. He stopped and looked at a large red lantern hanging on a tree branch. There was no joy in it at all. He heavily exhaled and helplessly said, "It's like doing business. I originally wanted to use this time's Wulin Alliance leader election to bring prestige to the manor. When the time comes, we can find a buyer ourselves. The highest bidder gets it. The king of Jing urgently wants to buy it, and we don't have to worry about the next buyer. We can follow our own temperament and not sell it. Now that we are in trouble and we turn to the Jing Palace, I'm afraid Quick Snow Mountain Villa will have to be sold at a low price. If we buy and sell it to everyone's satisfaction, then it's fine. But now I'm afraid that even if we sell it to the Jing Palace, that young vassal king will remember that Quick Snow Mountain Villa was not tactful in the past and make things difficult for the manor. I know that this vassal king has a master behind the scenes, and his governance is clear, and he is well known. He is not inferior to the old vassal king in any way. Judging from his words and actions, he doesn't seem to have a big heart. A person without foresight will have immediate worries. As the head of the manor, I'm afraid that when I pay respects to my ancestors in the future, I won't have the face to face them." The old steward softly comforted him. "Yanbao has already sent people to the king of Jing and to mobilize troops. I hope it will be settled in one fell swoop. Once the thousands of iron cavalry from Xiang and Fan arrive, as long as the assassin leaves a trace, it will be difficult for him to escape. I'm afraid that he will kill in 10 steps, and by now he has already escaped." A trusted steward of the manor hurriedly delivered a message. "Manor Lord, we've only traveled less than 10 li from Yanbao when we were intercepted by Prince Jing and scouts. It turns out that Prince Jing had already used the military tally to mobilize the Qingzhou Navy. The warships were lined up on the lake 20 li away. It was only because of the thick fog on the lake that no one noticed them. Furthermore, There were more than 4,000 light cavalry stationed at every intersection, along with dozens of scouts scattered all over the place. As soon as there's any movement, we can reel in the net. After Yuqi Liangfu recovered from his pleasant surprise, he bitterly smiled and said, "This Prince Jing, and truly has divine foresight." So it turns out that Soar Snow Manor has become a fish pond. As long as the big fish takes the bait, it will be dragged to the shore. Think. Look, maybe Xie Lingzhen and Li Yibai are the Crown Prince's students. They are only there to deceive the public and make it look better for the imperial court to meddle in the martial arts world. Manor Lord, there is one thing I have to say. Fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. If Quick Snow Mountain Villa wants to turn from bad to good, distant water cannot quench the immediate thirst. We can only choose the Jing Palace as our neighbor. After all, he is the first king to inherit the throne after the spring and autumn period. He is quite favored in the capital. Yuqi Liangfu waved his hand to dismiss the steward. He hesitantly said, "Let me think about it." The old steward anxiously said, "Manor Lord, time waits for no one." Anger appeared on Yuqi Liangfu's face. He spoke without thinking, "Do you really want Nyochuan to be the concubine of that young king who has always been in love with his mother? Yuqi Liangfu can't sell his daughter for glory and wealth." The old steward kept quiet out of fear. He sighed and said, "It was a bad plan. Although the villa was saved, it was indeed hard on the young miss." Yuqi Liangfu patted the old man's shoulder and said apologetically, "Old Lu, I know you are loyal and devoted to the manor, but I, Nyochuan, only have one daughter. She has the same stubborn temperament as her mother who died young. As her father, I have to make her happy. Marrying a poor boy who truly likes her is better than marrying into a family of generals and ministers where everything is out of her control. How many women can live happily as duckweed?" The old steward nodded. Yuqi Liangfu fiercely rubbed his cheeks and said in a low voice, "Wait a little longer." At the outer corridor, compared to Yuqi Liangfu and the old steward who were stuck in a quagmire, it was much more relaxed on the surface. Yuqi Nyochuan volunteered herself, saying that she could reach her residence by rowing a boat. However, when she approached the railing and knocked, she was immediately dumbfounded. At that time, she was in a hurry to get ashore and forgot to fasten the small boat with a black canopy. Probably because of the lake breeze, there was no trace of the small boat. This made Yuqi Nyochuan's face turn red. She didn't dare to look at Su Fengyan and Lin Hongyuan. At this moment, a black figure slowly passed through the fog and appeared in everyone's field of vision. A young and handsome Daoist stood at the bow of the boat with an exquisite bamboo flute tied to his waist. He had a somewhat ethereal and otherworldly charm. The orthodoxy of the world revered the ancestral court, Mount Longhu. The Daoists of the world naturally regarded the Mount Longhu's heavenly master as the most important. Although the young Daoist in front of them didn't dress like a noble from the heavenly master's residence, his bearing could make people forget him at a glance. Lin Hongyuan slightly narrowed her eyes in order to hide her schadenfreude. The main character had arrived. Moreover, this young Daoist who had a meteoric rise in the imperial court and a great reputation in the Jianghu didn't disappoint Lin Hongyuan. On the contrary, his words broke the heavenly mystery. This humble Daoist of Mount Longhu's Zhao Ningxian greets young palace head Lin and young Miss Yuqi. Also, this young master, your left hand has been pierced by a sword in your sleeve. Would you allow this humble Daoist to make an unnecessary move and shamelessly gift you a bottle of the mountain's secret golden sore medicine? Su Fengyan didn't move at all. He stood by the railing with his hands in his sleeves. Zhao Ningxian smiled warmly. Other than returning the boat to young Miss Yuqi, this humble Daoist also has a gift in return. I remember that at that time on the great snowfield, there was someone who spoke malicious words and didn't return a sword owed. Su Fengyan's reply simply swayed Yuqi Nyochuan's mind. Of course, she didn't care about some Mount Longhu Daoist owing a sword on the great snowfield. This silly girl's but had always been unswervingly tilted towards the fellow beside her. She only heard him ask, "Are you courting death?" Chapter 8:35. Lin Hongyuan's eyesight was needless to say. No matter how much this woman wanted to watch a big show, he still hurriedly pulled Yu Chiyuquan out of the corridor and went straight to the latter's boudoir. Zhao Ningxin on the lake and Su Fengnian in the corridor stood facing each other silently. They seemed to be at ease, but they didn't know that the grudge between them started from their father's generation. Su Xiao was at the end of Jianghu and almost pressed down Dragon Tiger's head. Su Fengnian stared at the young Taoist in front of him and sneered. His hands were crossed in front of his chest and his fingers were covered in red ropes. It was said that this little Taoist master had once blocked Dong Tai's sword. At first, people thought it was a boast from Dragon Tiger Mountain. Later, Zhao Ningxin blocked the mad monk of the west and stopped for several miles. Finally, no one doubted him and some even began to regard him as a Xian finger expert. Zhao Ningxin stood at the bow of the boat with a warm smile. I predicted that His Royal Highness would come to Snow Villa today to enjoy the snow. I predicted that he would go to Spring God Lake to see Wang Dongxiang and then Lu Feiqi. The only thing I didn't expect was that Your Highness would kill Li Huoli from Yanbao and Xiaolingzhen from the cottage. Aren't you afraid that once it's leaked, you'll become the common enemy of Jianghu before you inherit the title of king? Su Fengnian took 2 steps closer to the railing. Li Huoli has Zhao Gou's protection and the support of the imperial court. Xiaolingzhen's spring invitation cottage is also creating momentum for him. The position of Wulin Alliance's chief will be his. Why does he need Dragon Tiger Mountain to add flowers to the brocade? Now that I think about it, your Mount Longhu only knows how to do shady business like writing poems to prolong the emperor's life. It's rumored that you're the reincarnation of the founder of Dragon Tiger Mountain. Have you been enlightened? You probably haven't. Otherwise, Long Qi would have released the Lotus of Fortune long ago. With your Taoist master residence's character, you can't wait to dig the dead out of their coffins to inform them of such a good thing. You enjoy it alone and monopolize the good things. You enjoy it together, you only let people know of your good deeds. Anyway, you don't interfere with either. Zhao Ningxin shook his head and smiled. His Royal Highness has a deep prejudice against Dragon Tiger Mountain. Those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. Su Fengnian intertwined his 10 fingers only slightly separated by an inch. Zhao Ningxin said, "Wait a minute." Zhao Ningxin smiled and said, "This time I came to visit the Snow Mountain Villa, I didn't want to get involved in the matter of the Wulin Alliance leader. The turmoil of the Spring Invitation Cottage and Wild Goose Castle is not in my eyes, and I don't care." This time, he only wanted to see His Royal Highness. Since he had already seen him, he came in high spirits and returned in high spirits. The Great Snow Plateau owed a sword, but Longhu Mountain's return gift meant that Bailiang didn't have to pay it back. I only hope that Bailiang won't make things difficult for Longhu Mountain and will mind their own business. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "What? You actually predicted that before I return to Bailiang, I'll kill every Taoist who dares to take a single step out of Mount Longhu? You predicted that I'll offer a reward of 100 taels of gold for each Taoist master mansion person in Jianghu, and Bailiang will promise to shelter him from the wind and rain, so that your Taoist masters of Mount Longhu will be in danger? So you used the bloody case of Snow Mountain Villa to threaten everyone to take a step back and celebrate the new year peacefully?" Zhao Ningxin's eyes were clear and calm. He said, "Your Highness is willing to guard the northwest for the people of the Central Plains. I also sincerely admire you. If I was a free cloud and a wild crane, I would definitely raise a big white bough. Unfortunately, I have to do things in my position. Since I was born with the surname Zhao, I have to do things that go against my pure heart. I hope your Highness can understand. To kill 1,000 of the enemy but to lose 800 of your own men, it won't benefit Mount Longhu or Bailiang. Back then, Mount Longhu didn't allow the first commandery princess to climb the mountain to burn incense. It was the Taoist master mansion's fault. That's why when sect leader Hong destroyed a total of 9 Lotus of Fate, the Taoist master mansion didn't say anything. Ancestor Zhao Xuansu came out of seclusion and went down the mountain. He intentionally made things difficult for your Highness outside the martial emperor city of the Eastern Sea. In the end, it was the cycle of karma and his body died. He painstakingly cultivated for a total of 140 years, but in the end he still couldn't achieve immortality. An eye for an eye, Mount Longhu has nothing to say. Su Fengnian pointed his chin at the red snake with 10 fingers on his hands. With your knowledge, you must have seen through the trick. It's a living tool left by the Catman Han Diaosi outside the Shenwu city. Originally, after the Catman died, it would quickly wither away. But Han Xianxia forgot about the abilities of my otherworldly item. His head is a rare treasure in the world, and it taught me a lot of tricks. Han Xianxia had a very interesting saying, "If you respect me, I will respect you tenfold. If you bully me once, I can't wait to bully you forever." The grudge between Bailiang and Mount Longhu should be blamed on Su Shao or the old emperor. You and I both know very well. How did Prime Minister Yui and Prime Minister Qingxi come about? Wasn't it because the old bastard Zhao Huangqiao accidentally raised an evil dragon that brought disaster to Earth Lung Mountain? Wasn't it because he couldn't suppress it, so he changed his mind at the last minute and changed his mind to appease Mount Longhu, which still had some use for you? Zhao Huangqiao went to the capital and asked the old emperor, who should call him third grandpa, for a decree. In the end, he rushed 800 miles and handed it to him. That's how the legend of an immortal entering Mount Longhu with an imperial decree came about. I borrowed a sword from the snowy plains and used a flying sword to suppress Mount Longhu. Do you dare to fart? When it comes to me, do you think that just because I'm the son of a vassal king who's fishing for fame, you can show the demeanor of an expert and discuss the Tao with me? Chapter 8:36. Zhao Ningxin smiled. I've heard Mr. White Lotus say that His Royal Highness is good at doing business. Now that I've seen it, I know it's true. Let me ask His Royal Highness, has the otherworldly item that's been floating at the bottom of the lake been properly prepared? Do we really have to fight to the death? His Royal Highness' life seems to be much more valuable than mine. What if, and I'm saying what if, both jade and stone are destroyed? Would Your Highness, who's good at scheming, lose the jade or the stone in this business deal? Su Fengnian's expression was calm as he replied, we don't have to fight to the death. Even if we really wanted to kill you, we might not be able to. After all, Xielingzhen's realm was like a pavilion in the sky. A Confucian scholar can only talk on paper and learn from each other. In the end, he's too weak compared to a martial artist who stood up from a pile of corpses. His realm is empty, but once he fights, he'll be exposed. Moreover, Xielingzhen mistakenly thought that I was only relying on my Vajra physique to pester him endlessly. He died a wrong death. Longhu Mountain has been on guard against me for a long time. I reckon we'll have to meet force with force and experience the Daoists one step into the mysterious finger. In the end, we'll beat you until you can't laugh. No matter what, we'll have to make you half dead. Zhao Ningxin smiled and asked, His Royal Highness is determined to make things difficult for me? Su Fengnian exposed him and sneered. Are you going to wait until Longhu Mountain finishes everything in one fell swoop to enlighten you? Zhao Ningxin closed his eyes and held his breath, trying to hide the faint trace of anger in his eyes. Su Fengnian mocked. Even a clay statue is angry? Zhao Ningxin opened his eyes and didn't say anything. He just spread out his hand. Since you say I'm courting death, then come and kill me. This confidence did not come from the reincarnation of the ancestor of the Zhao family, but from the fact that this young Taoist who often got lost in his thoughts had actually blocked Deng Tea's sword when he was still inexperienced. Not long ago, he had even blocked Lu Songtao, who was both a Buddha and a demon. Su Fengnian supported himself with one hand on the railing and jumped up, looking like he was going to kill the flute-playing Daoist who bore Longhu Mountain's great expectations. However, with Su Fengnian's realm of otherworldly item cultivation, he should have smoothly rushed to Zhao Ningxin. But the latter clearly felt that when Su Fengnian supported himself with the railing, his body stagnated for a moment. This made Zhao Ningxin, who didn't have the ability to predict the future, also stagnated. The boat originally needed to slide back one zhang to have the confidence to block Su Fengnian's attack. But now, the boat was cut in half and stopped half a zhang away. Su Fengnian suddenly moved without any warning. He rushed forward and let go of the railing. The railing behind him shattered into pieces. Zhao Ningxin frowned and didn't move. The boat slid back 1.5 zhang without any wind. When Su Fengnian stretched out his arm to push, Zhao Ningxin put one hand behind his back and the other in front of his chest. The bell didn't make a sound and only struck thunder when it rang. It seemed like a gentle stroke, but it actually created clouds and thunder around his knees. Purple qi lingered around his knees, making Zhao Ningxin look more like an immortal. Su Fengnian didn't rely on his Vajra body like he did when he killed Li Huoli and Xianxia. He rushed forward recklessly, his hands dazzlingly tearing apart Zhao Ningxin's purple clouds and thunder. Zhao Ningxin gently lifted his foot and kicked Su Fengnian's abdomen. Su Fengnian also pressed his palm on Zhao Ningxin's forehead. Almost at the same time, he suddenly exerted force. The boat retreated into the fog like an arrow. Su Fengnian quickly floated back to the outer corridor, bent his knees and stepped on the outer wall. He rushed forward like thunder again and the wall collapsed. Zhao Ningxin, who was in the fog, picked up the dark green bamboo flute and twirled his 2 fingers. The bamboo flute was like a bamboo dragonfly stirring up the fog on the lake. It was like splashing water at Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian's 5 fingers formed a hook and tried to crush the dark green bamboo flute. He still underestimated the flute's majestic qi. He let go as soon as he touched it. His body was bounced to the side of the lake. His feet splashed a lot of water before he could land on the lake. Zhao Ningxin lightly shouted, "Rise." The boat rose several feet from the water and barely dodged a sneak attack under the water from a vermilion robe. The latter flashed and disappeared. When the boat fell, Su Fengnian tiptoed and chopped at Zhao Ningxin. The dark green bamboo flute behind him was like a trapped beast. It was strangled by the flying sword Thunder Pool sword array. Zhao Ningxin, who also fought barehanded, stepped on the bow of the boat and fell into the lake. The whole boat turned over on the water and smashed back to Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian's hand chopped like an immortal touching the top of the head. He smashed the boat into pieces on the spot. His palm pressed down on the top of the head without slowing down. Half of his body was still in the lake. Zhao Ningxin didn't dodge and let Su Fengnian's palm hit on the top of his head. The lake water shook violently, setting off huge waves and hitting the corridor. Thousands of pounds of lake water poured into the courtyard behind the 2 people. Su Fengnian slowly floats down on a wooden plank on the lake surface after the small boat is broken. That palm actually doesn't touch Zhao Ningxin's head at all. This young Taoist qi is at its peak, which is unexpected. Zhao Ningxin floated to the surface and finally saw the real face of the otherworldly item behind Su Fengnian. It was in a red robe with 5 arms and a sad face. Zhao Ningxin said in a deep voice, "Since ancient times, evil things have been chaotic. I can tolerate your domineering highness, but I can't tolerate the otherworldly item. Today, even if I have to sacrifice my cultivation, I will enforce justice for heaven." This time, it was Su Fengnian's turn to stretch out a palm with a gloomy face. His eyes were full of hatred, indicating Zhao Ningxin to enforce justice for heaven. What a good, enforce justice for heaven. On the top of Kuanglu Mountain, there were celestial beings who went out of body. There were celestial beings who were angry and spitting out purple gas. They said that they would enforce justice for heaven. Zhao Ningxin didn't dare to be distracted. He breathed heavily with his palm on the back of his left hand, facing the East Taoist ancestral court Longhu Mountain. "Please." 3 words in 1 word. "Please allow Longhu Mountain. Please celestial beings come down to heaven. Please come down to earth." A portrait of the first ancestor fell to the ground in the mansion of celestial masters. A purple thunder as thick as a pillar blasted down from the sky. After a blink of an eye, Zhao Ningxin's face was blurred and his whole body was purple gold. Chapter 837. There were portraits of the ancestors hanging on the wall of the temple of Dragon Tiger Mountain. The portrait of the first ancestor fell without any wind. A dozing Taoist boy guarding the hall was so scared that he did not dare to pick up the scroll. He hurriedly reported the situation to the residence of the Taoist master. Zhao Danxia, who was in charge of all Taoist affairs, quickly walked into the temple of Dragon Tiger Mountain. She was pleasantly surprised, but there was still a trace of worry in her heart. She knelt down in front of the temple of Dragon Tiger Mountain and carefully picked up the scroll. Bai Yu, an outsider of the residence of the Taoist master, slowly stepped over the threshold. Mr. White Lotus, who thought he was a bookworm, had hurt his eyes from reading, so he walked slower than others. He squatted beside Zhao Danxia and was lost in thought. Zhao Danxia, the head of the Liang Taoist, asked softly, "It's inevitable that fortune and misfortune depend on each other. But in Mr. White Lotus's opinion, how much fortune and misfortune are there?" Baiyu shook his head and said, "The divinations are a mess. But since Attentive Mind was able to invite the first ancestor of Dragon Tiger Mountain, compared to inviting the 3 modern ancestors 100 years ago to kill Lu Songtao of the Devil Cult with the 10,000-mile Sky Thunder Nail, Attentive Mind can rest assured. Since he is enforcing justice on behalf of heaven, he will most likely use great fortune to eliminate misfortune. Baiyu really can't think of anyone in the world who can suppress the first ancestor. Wang Xianxia is only a few people who can fight, but on the Spring God Lake, Attentive Mind will undoubtedly win. After this battle, it will be a great thing for Dragon Tiger Mountain." Zhao Danxia respectfully hung the portraits of the ancestors in the middle of the wall. After hanging them up, she knelt down and kowtowed. Then she stood up and took a few steps back, looking at the wall that was filled with the portraits of immortals from different dynasties. Even a Jinren like her felt a little high-spirited. Most of these ancestors who had ascended were the biggest protective talismans of Longhu Mountain. They had stood tall for nearly 1,000 years, while the Liang dynasty had only been around for 200 years. If it wasn't for the fact that the #1 blessed land of Taoism, the Earth Lung Mountain, produced an evil dragon that was related to the Dragon Tiger Mountain and affected the Dragon Pool Golden Aura Lotus, this place would have almost become a pillar of luck that was on par with the heavenly gates. Then, it would be guaranteed that the next 500 years of great fortune would be unimaginable. Zhao Danxia suppressed the haze in her heart and thought of Zhao Ningxin, a direct descendant of the Taoist master's mansion, who had blocked Dong Tai's sword when he came up the mountain to greet the ceremony. Her mood was undoubtedly better. She smiled while twirling her beard. "With such a good seedling like Ningxin, we can invite the ancestors so quickly. It's 20 to 30 years earlier than we expected, so we don't have to worry about the lack of manpower. With Mr. White Lotus's wholehearted support, Mount Longhu will have no worries." Baiyu suddenly rubbed his eyes hard and stared at the dozens of portraits on the wall with a horrified expression. Mr. White Lotus's vision was weak, but his mind was sharp. He vaguely sensed that there was a strange phenomenon. Zhao Danxia's cultivation was profound, so she was only a step slower than Baiyu. She noticed the abnormality of the portraits on the wall, which had never been seen before. Almost all the portraits of the ancestors showed signs of collapsing. Only the portrait that looked like Qi Xianxia was able to escape. None of the others were lucky enough to escape. Baiyu muttered absent-mindedly, "Impossible, impossible." The feather minister was uneasy. He knelt down heavily with his right hand covering the back of his left hand and sobbed. This unfilial descendant, Zhao Danxia, kneels down and begs the ancestors to show mercy. In the night, Mount Longhu seemed peaceful, but in fact, there were turbulent undercurrents. A year after Mount Wudong was sealed off, most of the Taoist temples began to welcome pilgrims from all over the world again. However, the temple with a statue of Zhenwu the Great was still closed to visitors. Chen Zhao and Song Jiming, who were the most senior Taoist priests, lived in seclusion and rarely came out. They only occasionally went in and out of this temple. Fortunately, Mount Wudong was used to these kind old Taoist priests being elusive. Unlike other famous Taoist caves and blessed lands, the slightly senior Taoist priests were busy entertaining high-ranking officials and dignitaries. How could they have the time to concentrate on cultivation? After the old chief, Wang Zhonglo, Mount Longhu had 2 young new chiefs. However, the incense in Mount Wudong did not decline but instead became more and more prosperous. This made the Taoist and Taoist children on the mountain feel happy. However, with the example of the senior Taoist, they did not feel that they should be condescending when the incense was prosperous. Even the youngest chief in the history of Wudong, Li Yufu, was no different from an ordinary Taoist. Other than personally teaching subjects every day, he often set up a stall to tell the fortunes of ordinary pilgrims. Some illiterate pilgrims also asked him to write letters home. Li Yufu did not refuse any of them and wrote in regular script meticulously. The pilgrims all said that after sending letters, their families became more prosperous. In the beginning, pilgrims from scholarly families advised the people that disturbing the chief would delay the great Taoist master's cultivation to achieve immortality. However, Li Yufu personally comforted the people, saying that cultivation was to cultivate to be an ordinary person. It did not matter if one could not cultivate to become an immortal. Eating, sleeping, reading, and writing were all part of the cultivation, which meant that they were cultivating to be an ordinary person. Once they cultivated to have a normal heart, it did not matter if they could not cultivate to become an immortal. Eating, sleeping, reading, and writing were all part of the cultivation. A maxim began to circulate in Jianghu. The people of Jianghu cultivated immortality, but Mount Wudong cultivated ordinary life. In the temple, Qin Yao, the most senior person of Mount Wudong who was in charge of discipline, stood solemnly at the threshold of the temple. He looked at the statue of Zhenwu, great emperor in the temple. Beside him was Song Jiming, who was more than 140 years old and had experienced 4 chiefs, and Yu Xingrui, the master of the current chief of Mount Wudong, Li Yufu. The 3 Taoist priests looked extremely solemn. Yu Xingrui was a person who could not hold back his words. He whispered to his 2 senior brothers. When His Royal Highness returned to Bailiang after traveling Jianghu for the 2nd time, he kept asking us about the difference between Mount Longhu and Mount Wudong's methods of inviting deities. According to the scale of this grand ritual of Zhou Tian, which deity of Mount Wudong would you like to invite? Originally, if little junior brother was willing to ascend, it would not be too difficult to invite ancestor Lu to descend. At least it would be slightly easier than attaining immortality. But then again, even if it is not as difficult as ascending to heaven, with His Royal Highness's current cultivation, the key has never been cultivation. Even with Mount Wudong's 81 peaks as the grand ritual of Zhou Tian, it may not be possible to invite a deity who should not be tainted by the mortal world. Senior Brother Chen, Senior Brother Song, to be honest, I've always been unwilling to let Mount Wudong get involved in the secular world's struggle for tripod cauldrons. It goes against Ancestor Lu's teachings. Song Jiming smiled and said, Mount Longhu is anxious. They can't wait to transfer the fate of the entire Dragon Lake to that little celestial master so that he can enlighten his orifices. But cultivation is like climbing a mountain. One has to be down to earth and climb the stairs. There is no such thing as letting the mountain come and help me. Mount Longhu has produced many deities with the surname Zhao, but before the old Taoist priest could finish, Qin Yao suddenly turned around. A bolt of purple thunder smashed down from the sky. Qin Yao frowned and said, that little celestial master is indeed not vulgar. He forcefully enlightened his orifices at such a young age. How good would it be if he could do it step by step? There is one more fully deserving Taoist priest in the world. So what if he suppresses Mount Wudong? At this time, the 3 seniors of Mount Wudong did not know that the 5 words, banishment to 3,000 miles, on the statue of Zhenwu the Great behind them were gradually disappearing. Chapter 8:38. On the Spring God Lake, there were many navy warships. The king of Jing and Zhao Sun personally boarded one of the yellow dragon warships. Beside the king, who was wearing a bright yellow robe, there was a woman with a white veil covering her face. She had a graceful figure. The strategist behind the scenes, who had been following him like a shadow, did not follow him today. The reason was that Zhao Sun was selfish. After the sudden death of the old king of Jing and Zhao Heng, the number of trusted aides of the young king could be counted with one hand. Among them, there was only one man and one woman that he trusted. There was no need to talk about the blind Lu Su. Both the old and the new king treated him as a national scholar. Zhao Sun was also well aware that in addition to the shaky title of King of Jing and the most precious thing was still the strategist with extraordinary military strategy. Zhao Sun sincerely valued Lu Su, even to the point of reverence. But because of this, when Lu Su intentionally or unintentionally showed indifference to the woman beside him, it made Zhao Sun very embarrassed. He was afraid that Lu Su would be displeased. As the lord of Qingzhou, he never brought the woman into the Jing'an palace. Instead, he hid her in a golden house in the city. For her, he even avoided the matter of concubines several times. It was enough to show her position in the young king's heart. Zhao Sun quietly reached out his hand, wanting to hold her hand, but she gently glared at him. The young king resentfully withdrew his hand. Not only was he not annoyed by her insensitivity, he was instead full of joy. This kind of woman was the most similar to the woman who was destined to be unattainable in this life. Nominally, the previous Princess Jing'an, Pei Nanwei, had already died for love. If she was at his beck and call, and obedient to his every command, even if the woman beside him looked like Pei Nanwei, Zhao Sun would not favor her and would have long regarded her as a chicken rib. Zhao Sun looked around. The Qingzhou Navy was majestic in his eyes. He was also confident that he could make the Qingzhou Navy more powerful than the Guangling Navy. At this time, his heart was full of ambition. He reached out a hand and pointed to the river, as if he was talking about the country, and said, "Nanwei, father could not control the Qingzhou Navy at all, let alone make the Green Party bow their heads. But I did it, and it only took a year." The woman said with a gentle voice, "Mr. Liu is a pillar of great talent that even Grand Preceptor Sun and Grand Preceptor Zhang have repeatedly praised. Living in Xiangfan is already an injustice. You absolutely cannot have the slightest bit of complaint towards Mr. Liu just because Mr. Liu doesn't like me. If Mr. Liu only listens to your preferences, then people will look down on you." Zhao Sun was even more delighted when he heard this. He nodded, "Don't worry about this. As long as I, Zhao Sun, am rich, I will not let Mr. Liu be poor. What Yanqi King Xiaobing can give Nailan Yusi, I can only give Mr. Liu more." The woman coldly reprimanded, "What's the point of saying these flowery words? You know that Mr. Liu does not care about those empty titles. Your temper is too frivolous." Zhao Sun laughed loudly, "That's right. You should calm down." There was a moment of silence. Zhao Sun looked at the 800-li spring Immortal Lake and said in a low voice, "One day, I will give you the spring Immortal Lake." Zhao Sun swears that these words are not false. The corner of the woman's mouth rose. Outside the city of Xiangfan, a group of travelers arrived. 2 carriages passed through the city but did not enter. There were rich men, powerful men, a fat pig, and several retainers who caused people to be intimidated at first glance. Approaching the fork in the reed pond, the 2 carriages stopped at the same time. The old man got off the carriage. He walked with a slight limp and his hands on his hips, which could not hide his hunchback. He muttered to himself, "This is the place where he killed the 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin? And he killed that old woman, Zhao Heng's trusted cavalry, with a single spear?" The fat pig eagerly approached and said with a smile, "Father, His Highness said that he would draw his sword before he killed, and that he would return it to its scabbard after he killed." Ning Amei and the 100 Phoenix battalions were completely convinced at that time. The old man with yellow spots on his hands and face smiled. He squatted down and grabbed a handful of soil. Holding it in his hand, he looked at the reeds in a daze. The old man murmured, "After Huang Zhenta brought him back to Bailiang, he told me that this child scolded me every day and was full of resentment. But he always found excuses to go to places where I fought in the past to take a walk and take a look." The fat pig squatted down and felt uncomfortable holding it in. He simply sat down on the ground and said with a smile, "Father, His Highness has a sharp tongue but a soft heart. He is stubborn on the surface, but in his heart he admires you very much. Most sons are like this." The old man dismissed it with a smile. He tilted his palm and watched the soil slide down. He said softly, "Such a child who has a sword god and a death warrior protecting him, and who is so timid that he doesn't even dare to take off his soft armor when he sleeps. Why did he go to Beimang and risk his life for the 5th raccoon? The night before he went to Beimang, he drank with me. Before he died, he cried and told me that he had a dream that was not a dream. On the top of Kuanglu Mountain, there was a celestial being called Zhao Huangchao who had an out-of-body state and killed his mother's soul. He said that sooner or later he would kill that fellow. When this child first started to practice the saber, I actually did not think highly of him. But I know that revenge is one thing, wanting to take revenge is a matter of course. Whether he can do it or not is another matter. But if he wants to take revenge, whether he will do it or not, whether he will suffer hardships and then give up is another matter. In terms of status, if you add up all the places in Liang and Beimang, or even up to the spring and autumn period and the Central Plains, the number of people who are better than him can't be counted with 2 hands. However, to be able to dare to kill Su Huainan, kill the fifth raccoon, kill Luo Yang, kill the celestial being, and persist in doing what he wants to do step by step, it really can't be considered many. The old man wiped his sleeve with the hand that was grabbing the mud, and then took out a jade bracelet that had a few strands of green left in it from his other sleeve. The jade was dropping too quickly, not to mention that it was of a tender type and had a poor water source, so it wasn't worth much. The old man smiled and said, "When I was young, I had the best taste in women in the world, so I was a complete mess when it came to choosing these things. I wholeheartedly wanted to earn money to buy something presentable for my future wife, but I couldn't save any money, so I shamelessly borrowed 50 taels of silver from Sun Ping. In the end, I bought this damn bracelet, but it began to drop a few days after I gave it to her. Only then did I know that I had been cheated badly." However, the child's mother didn't mind and kept wearing it. The old man placed the bracelet on his skinny cheeks. "It was cool," he said softly. "That night, bald Donkey Yang asked me to drink. She said she was going out to buy more wine. She took off the bracelet and put it in her room. At that time, I didn't think much of it." The old man continued speaking. He put the bracelet back and slowly stood up. He calmly said, "Whoever dares to obstruct the scholars from moving north into Bailiang, kill them." Bailiang's tiger paw attack was unknown. At the lakeside of the Spring God Lake in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, it was unknown whether it was Zhao Ningxian from the Celestial Master Mansion or the first Grandmaster of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. The Daoist priest was covered in purple gold. His face was blurry, but he had a majestic celestial aura. When an ordinary man was angry, blood would splatter 3 feet. When the emperor was angry, millions of corpses would fall. So what if the celestial was angry? The Daoist priest, whose aura was even more imposing than Guanglu Mountain's Chunglong Zhao Huangchao, shouted, "How dare you, Su Fengyan, use the Yin object to bring chaos to the human world? You don't know that the net of heaven has a long arm. Under the majestic heaven's way, why don't you surrender?" The Spring God Lake was turbulent. The lake's waves rose more than 10 feet high. They were almost as high as the mountain villa's eaves. The Daoist priest floated. Not a single drop of the lake water flowed into the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. Su Fengyan laughed savagely. His laughter spread throughout the mountain villa. The celestial was furious. This evil ant in front of him dared to be so impudent. Su Fengyan restrained his laughter. His expression was solemn. "You and that Zhao Huangchao, open your dog eyes and see who is the real mortal." Above the Spring God Lake, the world suddenly lit up. It was as bright as day. Su Fengyan closed his eyes. His hands were placed in front of his abdomen, as if he was leaning on a sword. There was a turtle in the Spring God Lake. There was a wordless heavenly steel on the turtle's back. The turtle's back, which was as big as a hill, slowly appeared. Su Fengyan stood alone. Behind him, a celestial's golden foot suddenly stepped on the turtle's back. A giant python rolled out of the lake and coiled around the turtle. After the golden foot, a glorious golden body appeared in the world. It was 100 feet tall and looked down on the world. The Zhenwu Great Emperor guarded the north and ruled the Black Tortoise. The sound of Sanskrit and heavenly music was endless. A celestial maiden scattered flowers in the sky. They appeared in a flash and then disappeared in a flash. Su Fengyan said slowly with an expressionless face. His voice was as loud as a bell. "How can a celestial be in front of Zhenwu?" The face of Zhao Ningxian, who was more majestic than the emperor of the mortal world, suddenly blurred and became clear. The purple and gold aura around his body could not be maintained. With a slight hesitation, Zhenwu Great Emperor, who was hundreds of feet tall, raised his hand and chopped down with a huge sword that did not have a solid shape. It directly shattered the so-called celestial body of the first dragon tiger sex ancestral master. 1,000 miles away, the Dragon Lake in the Heavenly Master Mansion was boiling. None of the Lotus of Providence was left. They all withered and withered, leaving only a small bud floating helplessly. A middle-aged Daoist living on Mount Longhu was flustered and exasperated. His body seemed to be bound by the supreme heavenly Tao. His knees were forced to the ground, creating 2 pits. That was not all. His head was pressed down as well. The Taoist faced Jinwu and knelt down. The Taoist who didn't cultivate the heavenly Tao and only lived in seclusion said with difficulty, "Dragon Tiger Mountain has harmed the Zhao family." Chapter 839. Zhao Ningxin, who had been beaten back to his original form, stood on the spring god lake in a daze. He was truly out of his wits. His red robe fluttered around him like a glutton eating a plate of delicious food. Su Fengnian ignored the young Taoist who had mobilized so many people to invite the first Taoist master. He stepped on the Kuei turtle and carried the wordless stone tablet on his back as he paddled towards the spring god lake. Jinwu Great Emperor's golden body turned around and faced the Qingzhou navy. In an instant, they were only a few miles apart. Su Fengnian lifted his foot and Jinwu Great Emperor followed like a shadow. He lifted his golden foot and was about to stomp down. The navy warships surrounded the shore of the spring god lake in an arc. The yellow dragon warship that the king of Jing and Zhao Sun was on was the first ship to bear the brunt of the attack. It was about to be stomped down by the golden body. Most of the sailors had already prostrated themselves on the ground and awaited their deaths. The retinue of the king's mansion was much more decisive. They ignored the fear in their hearts and leaped up in an attempt to block the foot of the immortal for the young king. In an instant, more than 20 people took out their weapons and rushed towards Jinwu Great Emperor. However, they were all crushed back to the ship by the power of the stomp. Zhao Sun's face was pale. He held the cold hand of the woman beside him and looked at the sky. Just when Zhao Sun thought that he was going to die, a man in a plain Taoist robe swept across the water like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. He stepped on the flags of the warships and crashed into Jinwu Great Emperor's foot. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment but still stepped down slowly. Jinwu Great Emperor continued to step down. The young Taoist's shoulder was badly mutilated. He gritted his teeth and said, "Your Highness, you can't rely on the power of heaven to kill people. Even if you use the black tortoise Dharmakaya for a moment, the celestial court and your real body will." Su Fengnian was expressionless as he continued to step down. The young Taoist was already forced to land on the yellow dragon warship. The entire warship began to sink into the lake, leaving only the king of Jing and Zhao Sun above the surface of the lake. After the Taoist panted, he knelt down on one knee and resisted Jinwu Great Emperor's golden body and golden feet. He told Su Fengnian intermittently in a secret language with great difficulty, "Huaibei's ranger He Zhu risked his life to deliver a token to your highness. It can't be delayed." At this moment, he has already rushed to the outside of the quick snow villa. His life is hanging by a thread. Su Fengnian frowned and withdrew his foot. Jinwu Great Emperor finally could not maintain his 100 feet golden body and slowly dissipated. The wordless monument on the back of the big turtle cracked inch by inch. Su Fengnian looked back with a complicated expression. Originally, with Zhao Ningxin's cultivation and the foundation of Dragon Tiger Mountain, the first generation of the founding ancestor, and the other invited the supreme Dharmakaya of Jinwu Great Emperor. Both Dragon Tiger Mountain and Wudong Mountain could be said to have used all their strength. Even a blind man would know who was better and who was worse. Originally, with Zhao Ningxin's cultivation and the foundation of Dragon Tiger Mountain, the founding ancestor could be free and unfettered in the human world for the time it takes to burn 3 incense sticks of incense, while the Jinwu Great Emperor that Su Fengnian invited could only last for half an incense stick's time. However, Su Fengnian did not have much regret about it. Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Emperor of the capital, the two Zhao families, had long been integrated into one. They shared fate and shared honor and disgrace. This time, he just treated it as beating a dog to show his master. Su Fengnian's original intention was to lure the celestial being Zhao Huangqiao to the spring god lake one day and kill both the celestial being and the celestial being. Zhao Ningxin was just by accident that Su Fengnian had no choice but to reveal the heaven's secret and his trump card. However, Su Fengnian did not have much regret about it. The two Zhao families, Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Emperor of the capital, had long been integrated into one. They shared fate and honor. This time, he just treated it as beating a dog to show his master. Su Fengnian glanced at the young leader of Wudong who was kneeling on the ground to send off Jinwu Great Emperor's 1,000 feet golden body. He did not have any ill feelings towards this young Taoist. In the long run, He had good intentions for stopping him from stepping on the spring god lake. Taking a deep breath, Su Fengnian covered his forehead with one hand. After the sharp pain, he was in a trance for a moment. His mind was as blank as a sheet of paper, as if he had forgotten something extremely important. However, he just could not remember it. Su Fengnian shook his head. Li Yufu staggered to his feet. His lips moved slightly as he sent a secret message, that He Zhu is seriously injured. The sword qi in his body has already formed a shadow. He is only relying on the help of this little Taoist to keep him alive. He will not live for long. Your Highness, please go out of the villa and meet him. Su Fengnian rushed back to the villa and stood on the roof of the courtyard to look down. He saw that a rider took advantage of the turmoil in the villa and rushed straight to the gate. The young ranger seemed to be trying his best to say something. However, at this time, the people in the villa were so shocked by the 1,000-feet golden body that came and went that they had no time to care about such a rude nobody. The galloping ranger was like a headless fly. His chest was covered with blood, his face was pale, and he was about to fall off the horse. In his blurred vision, the ranger saw a figure rushing over from the wall and helping him down from the horse. He sat on the ground against the wall and blood kept oozing out from the fingers covering his mouth. The white-haired young master in front of him knocked on several aperture acupoints to stop the vicious sword qi that was wantonly running around in his body. The young master asked in a deep voice, "I am Su Fengnian. What do you want to give me?" The ugly ranger took out a hairpin from his arms and handed it to Su Fengnian with trembling hands. He said in a hoarse voice, "I am He Zhu. I met a young devil who killed people on the street and was seriously injured. I was saved by a Miss Jia. She asked me to send this hairpin to Bailiang. She said that she and young master Su did not owe each other anything. Due to the final radiance of the setting sun before his death, He Zhu, who had regained some of his vigor, squeezed out an ugly smile and said slowly, I was injured by the sword qi and rushed to Bailiang. I heard that there were scholars from Shangyin Academy who were rushing to Bailiang, so I wanted to go with them. I could only blame myself for being incompetent and fainted halfway. Fortunately, I was saved by Zhenren Li, the leader of Wudang sect. Then I knew that young Master Su was in the villa. If I had known that young Master Su was His Royal Highness in Bailiang, I would not have agreed to this at that time. After all, the He family in Huaibei was exterminated by General Su. But since I have promised Miss Jia, I have to keep my promise. Su Fengnian held the blood-stained hairpin tightly and asked softly, How is Miss Jia? The ugly ranger said worriedly, I only know that Miss Jia has been fighting with 3 powerful devils for a long time. One of them has an amazing sword qi and killed people along the way. He calls himself Cut Willow. The other 2 also have an accent of Beimang. Zhenren Li of Wudang sect has revealed the secret of heaven. They are most likely level 1 masters in Beimang. When Miss Jia gave me the hairpin, she was in Qinghu City, which is more than 200 miles away from here. She was seriously injured in an alley called Plum Alley in the south of the city. I hope young Master Su can hurry to rescue her. Su Fengnian nodded and held his hand. He slowly injected genuine qi into his hand to prolong his life. I see. He Zhu shook his head and said, Young Master Su, you don't have to worry about my life or death. Li Yufu floated over. Su Fengnian stood up and bowed deeply to He Zhu. Li Yufu said softly, Your Highness, don't worry. You can go north. Yufu will send Brother He on his last journey. Su Fengnian's hands pressed down lightly, and the ground shook. His body rose from the ground like a rainbow, crossing the sky and crossing the quick snow mountain villa. Li Yufu squatted in front of He Zhu and held his pale face with both hands. The horse, which had been dependent on its master for many years, came to He Zhu's side. It lowered its head and touched He Zhu. Then it knelt on the ground and leaned against the corner of the wall to shelter its master from the cold. He Zhu asked with a smile, Zhenren Li, do you have any wine to drink? Li Yufu, whose shoulder was stained with blood, was in a dilemma. He Zhu shook his head and said with a smile, Forget it. I don't have any money for wine. It was said that people were so poor that they could only make a ringing sound. However, He Zhu's pockets didn't make any ringing sounds at all. He Zhu had only been a wine tax collector in a small town. He was not good at reading people's faces. After a few years of muddle-headedness, the money he earned was only enough to take the horse that the military camp did not want. He wanted to walk around Jianghu and see. If only he could use poetry to buy wine. Young man is chivalrous and makes friends with 5 heroes. Liver and gallbladder holes, hair stands up. In the negotiation, life and death are the same. A promise is worth 1,000 gold. A promise is worth 1,000 gold. The young paladin's murmur gradually faded away. Li Yufu did not want to let go for a long time. After a long time, the horse whimpered. Li Yufu stood up and put He Zhu on the horse's back. He led the horse out of the snow mountain villa slowly. Chapter 840. I originally said that I would upload the big chapter today. P.S. There is a WeChat public platform on the book in the snow. You can add me as a friend after scanning it. The villages of Tian Village were scattered all over the place. There were more than 6,000 trees planted in a large orange garden. The yellow oranges produced by the oranges were the second-class tributes of the imperial palace. However, after winter, the oranges were not full of fruits. However, there was a custom in the orange garden that every orange tree would leave 1 orange for the winter, which meant that there would be enough left to welcome the new year. No matter how bold the naughty children in the village were, they did not dare to climb the trees to steal the oranges. Every time they played around the orange garden, they only dared to look from afar. At this time, the orange garden was vaguely red. A young man in a green robe who looked like a scholar broke into the orange garden. He gently flicked his fingers and some weather-beaten red oranges fell down. He held them in his arms. Without peeling the skin, he ate half of the oranges in 1 bite and chewed. The handsome scholar was followed by a skinny old man with an ordinary face, who looked like an orange farmer guarding the garden. The young man grabbed an orange and grinned at the old man. The old man shook his head, indicating that he was not interested in the orange. The young man chewed the orange meat and peel and said vaguely in Beimang language, "The south of Liang River is really a good place where people won't starve to death. In the future, if I kill all the way here, I must get a good land from Li Mibi. I don't need to be an official." The old man glanced at the young man's back. There were 3 cocoon-like holes, which forcibly blocked the injuries. 2 swords and 1 knife had penetrated his body. Fortunately, he was still alive. The young man who was seriously injured did not care. He took 2 bites of an orange and quickly finished a whole bag of oranges. He reached out and patted the dust on his clothes, which affected his wounds. He could not help but grit his teeth and gently brushed a cocoon wound on his chest with a finger. The other 2 sword holes on his body were still manageable, but the knife wound under his finger was insidious. It was caused by a hand knife, which was not inferior to his specialty, Lu Qingyin. Thinking of the girl who carried a withered sunflower, the young man felt a headache. If he had known earlier, he would have continued to fight with the black-clothed youth outside the city instead of exchanging opponents with the sword Qi. At that time, he only thought that the unknown girl was fierce, but she was not as powerful as Su Longxiang, who was born with a Vajra body. In Shenwu City, he used a skillful sword to exchange for Su Longxiang's 2 swords with only brute force. He did not feel that he was at a disadvantage. In fact, he had a slight advantage. However, he really could not withstand the expressionless gaze of the youth who pulled out the willow shadow sword from his body. It was a pity that the short sword that he always carried with him was twisted into a piece of scrap iron by the youth. A section of willow dressed in a scholar's attire turned his head and laughed. "Old moth, I heard that Huang Qing fought with that kid until the sky darkened and the earth darkened. Just the sword alone was twisted into a piece of scrap iron by the youth?" The old man with the strange name nodded his head. Seeing that the cocoon on a willow was bleeding, he quickened his pace and stuck to his back. White threads seeped out of his fingertips and slowly weaved a cocoon on the wound of the willow. Out of the corner of the old man's eyes, there was a tall and burly figure standing on a small slope, as if he was looking into the distance. He flicked an orange from the willow and threw it to his companion who was a head taller than him. That person did not even turn his head. After catching the orange, he rubbed it in his palms and fell into a daze. It was a woman. Her figure was fat and the clothes she wore were too loose for a 7-foot man, but it still looked tight on her. She wore a Beimang woman's 5 weapons pendant on her head, and her face was smeared with yellow tassels. Unfortunately, her appearance was below average. Not only did it not add to her beauty, but it also made her look nondescript. A jade belt was tied around her waist. Hanging from it were small knives, small pouches, small flints, and many other small and practical objects. It was a dazzling array. She looked like a woman who knew how to live her life. She glanced at her, squatted on the ground, and rubbed his cheeks hard. He sighed heavily. He and 2 other genuine level 1 masters were still being chased by the little girl. Where was the justice? He and Old Moth were not only level 1 masters, but also the top figures in the spiderweb who were extremely proficient in assassination. If the news spread out, not only would he lose face, but the spiderweb would also lose face. Even Old Moth, one of the 2 cocoons of the spiderweb, said that the little girl was born to be in this bowl of rice. However, the little girl's days were bleak. She suffered from Old Moth's cocoon bind and Murong Nyang's palm, and one of her arms was crippled by him. She was not far from death, but she was still unwilling to give up. Until today, Old Moth thought that the next time she showed up, it would be the day she completely left Jianghu. Old Moth looked around and said to himself, "The little girl is proficient in Chimen Duanjia. She is an expert in both earth escape and water escape. Last time, we suffered a loss by the river. Princess Murong specially chose this village with soft soil and many ditches. She probably wants to generously give the little girl a chance to end this long-distance raid, so that we don't have to worry about her." Old Moth sneered and said, "The little girl is very clever. She won't take the bait." Chapter 841. Beimang's cobweb elder, who was nicknamed Old Moth, shook his head and laughed. The young lady's methods are ingenious, but unfortunately, her body can't keep up. She's continuously injured and won't be able to hold on for long. If the princess is more ruthless, she won't even give us this opportunity. With the 3 of them relying on each other, the young lady might have died silently on the way. It's a pity. The princess is different from us, who licks blood on the edge of our blades. She's more broad-minded. One section willow glanced at the sturdy back of the woman and smiled knowingly. Not only is she broad-minded, but her breasts are also slightly bigger. Old Moth wasn't a sly official, but he didn't continue. After all, the young lady was a junior of the same clan who was favored by the empress. Beimang had 2 royal surnames, Murong Baoding, who had been famous for a long time. Among the younger generation, there were also martial arts newcomers like Yelu Dongchuang and Murong Longshui. Their cultivation realms were even higher than Tuoba Chunsun, who had just entered the Vajra realm. Although Princess Murong's looks were indeed a little out of the ordinary, she had a good reputation in Beimang. She was familiar with the local customs of Liang like a scholar from the Central Plains. What was even rarer was that even though she was a descendant of the imperial family and had absolute arts, her temperament wasn't the slightest bit disagreeable. If it were any other lady of the imperial family who heard one section Willow's criticism, they would fly into a rage out of humiliation on the spot. The woman who was as famous as Yelu Dongchuang was flipping oranges in her palm. For some reason, she thought of something. Her aunt smiled and asked her, if Beimang annexed Liang, they would inevitably be affected by the customs of the Central Plains. How long would the Beimang men be able to continue practicing martial arts? If they couldn't even hold on for 100 years, what was the point of Beimang marching south? At that time, there was also a princess who liked marten headscarves. Her answer was that millions of people would die in exchange for the unification of Great Qin in the next 100 years. It would be a profit, not to mention that her aunt's name would be remembered for 1,000 years. No matter how lousy a shopkeeper or scheme was, it wouldn't be a loss. Murong Longshui clearly remembered that when the lady, who was also a princess, said this, her eyes were sharp as she looked at him provocatively. Murong Longshui's mood became a bit gloomy. During this journey with Senior Yilu and Spiderweb, they were constantly harassed by that little girl. Yilu was obviously annoyed. In the dangerous battles, she had killed more than 30 innocent women and children. Even though she wasn't happy about this, she couldn't say anything. Beimang and Liang seemed to be peaceful on the surface, but that was only because of the lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. During the several expeditions to the north, The soldiers who died in battle didn't have time to bury their bodies and had to dig up graves. Over the years, the people of Beimang had dug up their graves countless times. They shouldn't implicate their wives and daughters, and the dead were more important. It was better to squash enmity than to keep it alive. Many of these universal principles were not worth mentioning in the face of national enmity. Murong Longshui had traveled alone to Beimang many times and had seen many children in the north. Even though their ancestors had stayed away from the chaos of war for generations, when Liang was mentioned, they would all grit their teeth and look ferocious. There was not a single bit of innocence to speak of. One of the tribes spent a lot of money to buy a Central Plains woman who had been kidnapped to Beimang. She had been pregnant for several months, but she was cut open and died. A group of youths who weren't familiar with horse riding wantonly stepped on her corpse. Murong Longshui, who suddenly came back to his senses, saw the scene in his field of vision and was clearly stunned. A skinny girl carrying a withered sunflower walked over lightly. The closest Murong Longshui got to her was when he was escorting a branch of willow to escape. In an alley, he was slashed diagonally by the little girl's hand blade. Even though he crossed his arms to block the attack, he was still sent flying several feet away. However, the girl did not have it easy either. She was bound by one of the twin cocoons of the spiderweb. Murong Longshui did not care about bullying her with numbers. After rolling, he bounced back up and landed a solid palm strike on the girl's body. The young assassin smashed through the alley wall and disappeared in a flash. Murong Longshui did not care about bullying her with numbers. After rolling, he bounced back up and landed a solid palm strike on the girl's body. The young assassin crashed into the alley wall and disappeared in a flash. Murong Longshui did not have much malice towards her. However, this girl's disruption had delayed too much of the Taiping commandery's plan. She had to die. A branch of willow stared at the young assassin and said in bewilderment, "With her current pitiful state, there is still a slight chance of success if we ambush her. She walked out so openly. Does she think we are scared?" Old Moth hesitated. She most likely has a method of mutual destruction. A branch of willow shook his head. With the chaotic aura she exudes, she doesn't have that ability. Old Moth said in a low voice, "I remember Master said that there is fate above aura." A branch of willow immediately laughed. "Princess Murong, this girl is already an arrow at the end of its flight. I'll leave her to you." Although he said so, the 3 first-rank masters began to spread out quickly. Murong Longshui, who was walking down the slope, was in the middle. A branch of willow and Old Moth were on the left and right respectively. They were prepared to surround the girl who had crashed into a place of certain death. The girl who was carrying a branch moved her lips slightly. She seemed to be calculating the distance between them. The 4 of them looked up almost at the same time. Between the girl and the 3 of them, an uninvited guest crashed down from the sky with a loud bang. Amidst the commotion, the white-haired young man had his hands in his sleeves. His back was facing the assassin while he faced Murong Longshui and the other 2. Chapter 842. The tall and sturdy Murong Longshui stared fixedly at this guy who had appeared out of nowhere. In Liyang, the imperial court clamped down on the discussion, and only a few rumors managed to slip through the net. Therefore, the discussions about the Crown Prince of Baoyang were mostly superficial. They talked about how domineering he was in Great Peace City and how he made enemies with the students of the Imperial College. However, Beimang was completely different. It was precisely because of this guy's trip to Beimang that the world was turned upside down. Murong Longshui and the old enemy with the surname of Yelu were both interested in Liang because of him, so they personally went down south. No matter what kind of dishonorable and crooked method this person used to kill Raccoon Diwu, Murong Longshui still admired him. If she put herself in his shoes, she believed that if she went up against Tuoba Chunsun, who was protected by 2 great demons, the rainbow python and the lightning spear, then she would have a slim chance of survival. Murong Longshui hesitated for a moment and stared at this man of the same age who was tired from traveling and whose lips were chapped. Before a fierce battle that was destined to be a life-and-death battle, she smiled and threw the tangerine in her hand out. She thought that if this man generously accepted the tangerine and ate it before fighting, it would be a wonderful thing that could accompany drinking in the future. He naturally had a heroic demeanor of not caring about life and death. However, the tangerine had just been thrown into the air when it exploded, splashing juice all over Murong Longshui. Murong Longshui furrowed her thick brows. This crown prince of Bailiang was too petty. A man's jianghu was mostly black, white, and gray. A woman's jianghu was filled with many different thoughts. Murong Longshui was no exception. Yulu saw Murong Longshui suffer and was secretly delighted. His mind was filled with the comical scene of a handsome guy being pressed down by a 200 kilograms female warrior and beaten into a pig head. Old Moth was not as carefree as Old Moth. His footsteps were steady and he was not in a hurry. The current situation was no different from a heaven-sent opportunity for the three of them. That crown prince was being dragged down by the heavily injured young lady. It would be easier for him to fight the three of them alone. A willow leapt onto the branch of an orange tree beside him and looked into the distance, ensuring that there were no large groups of cavalry participating in the encirclement. It was better to be safe than sorry in other people's territory. After Su Fengyan landed on the ground, she took a deep breath and ran towards Murong Longshui, who was the closest to her. Along the way, she bypassed several orange trees that were bleak and desolate. Unlike Su Fengyan, she was so agile that she crashed into Su Fengyan. The two of them instantly collided. Su Fengyan pushed Murong Longshui's knee down with one hand and her 5 fingers were like hooks, slashing at Murong Longshui's thigh fiercely. The moment before the flying swords pierced into Murong Longshui's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It threw branches at Murong Longshui and Murong Longshui, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshui crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and the sky was filled with broken branches. Murong Longshui ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshui's chest. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengyan made a decision that would cause both of them to lose. Not only did she not pull back her fists, she planted her feet into the ground, and her fists moved smoothly. Just as all the flying swords were about to pierce into Murong Longshui's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It continuously threw branches at Murong Longshui and Murong Longshui, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshui crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and branches and leaves filled the air. Murong Longshui ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshui's chest. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengyan made a decision that would cause both of them to lose. Not only did she not pull back her fists, she planted her feet into the ground, and her fists moved smoothly. Just as all the flying swords were about to pierce into Murong Longshui's body, a willow that had been leisurely gathering branches from a distant orange tree finally made its move. It continuously threw branches at Murong Longshui and Murong Longshui, who were in the middle of a fierce battle, accurately blocking the attacks of the flying swords. Murong Longshui crossed her arms to protect her cheeks. The orange tree was shattered inch by inch, and the sky was filled with broken branches. Murong Longshui ignored the bone-piercing pain and rushed over to Murong Longshui's chest. Su Fengyan's fists collided with Murong Longshui's chest. She instantly made a decision that would cause both of them to suffer. Not only did she not withdraw her fists, but she also realized that the flying swords within 10 feet were like locusts. Su Fengyan pointed his forehead downwards and knocked on Su Fengyan's head. Murong Longshui's majestic body swung backwards, but his arms were held back by Su Fengyan, not giving him a chance to escape. Murong Longshui roared angrily and shook his arms, causing ripples to spread out and shake off the restraints. Su Fengyan's 10 fingers drew 10 bloody grooves on her arms so deep that her bones could be seen. Murong Longshui lowered her head, and her thigh-thick arms quickly wrapped around Su Fengyan's shoulders. If anyone saw this, they would mistake it for a lover's warm embrace, and it would be difficult to tell that there was killing intent hidden in all directions. Murong Longshui's body fell backwards, pulling Su Fengyan's entire body into the air. He tried to send Su Fengyan's head into the mud. Su Fengyan's hands gently patted on the wet mud, and in an instant, It was as if fog was rising in spirals. Murong Longshue's attempt to distance herself from Su Fengnian, and at the same time, she also wanted to throw herself under the willow's shade. Murong Longshue, who was lying in the snow and mud, let go of her hands. She wanted to get up like a carp and take the initiative earlier than Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian, who was originally head down, instantly flipped her body upside down after that pat. Both of her hands pressed against Murong Longshue's cheeks, and the two of them looked at each other. It was another scene that was brewing under the illusion of warmth. Previously, Murong Longshue had caught a tangerine that Willow had tossed to her and rolled it in his palm. This time, it was exactly the same. Su Fengnian seemed to want to treat her head as an orange. Murong Longshue's expression changed drastically, and in an instant, her fists and knees were like a torrential downpour. Ever since she debuted, the extraordinary woman from Beimang, who was known for her close combat skills, actually only wanted to distance herself from Su Fengnian. However, no matter how fierce her attacks were, Su Fengnian only supported her head and closed the gap between her palms inch by inch. His body remained unmoving, and he received all of Murong Longshue's thunderous attacks. Willow, who was squatting on a branch in the distance, had an uncertain expression. He still had a handful of tangerine branches in his hand, and seemed to be weighing the pros and cons. He did not immediately help the woman who was in danger. Previously, Old Moth had taken advantage of the gap to stretch his arms and wander around the tangerine forest, and no one knew what he was writing. Old Spiderweb was obviously more careful than Willow, who was watching the fire from the other side of the river. He kicked down an orange tree and stabbed it towards Su Fengnian's back. Murong Longshue, who did not dare to hold back, used all of his strength to punch Old Spiderweb's chest. Coincidentally, the tangerine tree stabbed into his back. The punch and the tree pulled each other together, and according to common sense, even if Old Spiderweb's body was like a diamond, his heart would be smashed and he would die on the spot. After Old Moth kicked out, he turned his head and glared at Willow. Willow rolled his eyes and swept to the side of Su Fengnian and Murong Longshue. However, Su Fengnian was unexpectedly unscathed. He finally took a step back and was willing to let go of Murong Longshue's big head. His hands slid down and held her cheeks up. Murong Longshue, whose body was full of qi, was lifted off the ground. Su Fengnian, slowly, walked to her side and swept a leg across the Beimang Commandery Princess's abdomen. Her tall and sturdy body bent in a deformed arc in the air and then shot towards Willow, who had rushed over to rescue her. Willow ignored the Commandery Princess's precious body and fell rapidly. At the same time, Old Moth put his thumb and index finger together and drew an inexplicable straight line in front of him. No less than 100 tangerine trees were uprooted and thrown at the lone Su Fengnian and then exploded in the air. Willow's mouth curled up and his 10 fingers played the strings. He was full of sword qi. The chaotic sword qi overflowed between heaven and earth like the Milky Way flowing in reverse, forming a cage with nowhere to hide. Su Fengnian stepped out and bent his knees slightly. It was as if he was carrying a cauldron on his shoulders. His hands lifted up into the air. With him as the center, the ground of hundreds of feet was lifted up. A rising curtain of mud faced the torrential sword qi that poured down in torrents. It was like an umbrella blocking the rain. Willow held a branch with both hands and coincidentally stabbed down at the center of the umbrella above Su Fengnian's head. Making use of the opportunity, Willow's shade. Su Fengnian looked up indifferently and stared straight at the famous killer of Beimang. Willow guessed that the situation was strange and immediately stopped his attack. He would rather give up the rare opportunity than risk his life. However, just as Willow withdrew his sword, he clearly saw a scheming smile appear at the corner of that guy's mouth. In an instant, Willow stabbed down again based on intuition. When the branch in his hand touched the space between Su Fengnian's eyebrows, Willow's heart calmed down. The branch had already pierced half a fingernail into the space between his eyebrows. Willow's eyes were sinister and wild with joy. The two of them were only a few feet apart, but the branch suddenly could not move forward at all. Willow did not lose his composure and wanted to withdraw his branch. However, a person in a red robe stepped on his back fiercely. Su Fengnian's fingers touched each other and pierced Willow's chest. Then he gently tore outwards. Willow's corpse was torn apart in the air. A large pool of blood splattered on Su Fengnian's face. Su Fengnian was still expressionless and did not say anything. He only shook his wrists and silently shook off the blood on his hands. He looked at the two remaining Beimeng masters in the orange garden. Chapter 843. Seeing a section willow being torn apart, Old Moth was flabbergasted. The great leader of the spider web, Li Mibi, had personally given the order for the three of them to work together. There was a reason behind this. Junju Murong Longshui possessed the physique of Vajra and was an expert in close combat. Together with a section willow, who was proficient in assassination, they were almost flawless. With the help of Old Moth, who was one of the two cocoons, he was an experienced man. He could add some icing on the cake or do some shady business to fill in the gaps. Even if they were up against two masters of the Liang Finger Mystery Realm, they could still fight. Even if a section willow was hit by two swords and a saber, which severely damaged his combat power, Old Moth did not believe that he could break the stalemate within the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. A battle to the death between experts was not only a battle of strength but also a battle of wits. In fact, Old Moth could see some clues. At that time, a section willow partnered with him and created a torrential rain of sword chi that poured down from the sky. Su Fengnian lifted up the ground to act as an umbrella and purposely revealed a fatal flaw at the handle of the umbrella. A section willow also suspected that it was a trap and made a gesture of withdrawing his sword midway. However, for some unknown reason, a section willow, who was famous for being good at capturing murderous intents, changed his mind and decisively stabbed his sword between his eyebrows. In fact, he almost succeeded. If a section willow successfully retreated, not to mention the great merit of the spider web, it would not be difficult for the Empress to bestow a few princesses and princesses. Moreover, the tripartite balance of power between the Beimeng, Liang, and Bailiang would be weakened. Old Moth never expected that he would still be fine, while the one willow that Li Mibi valued greatly could only die in a foreign land. It wasn't that Old Moth had never crossed a quagmire situation where his hands and feet were bound. A few years ago, he had even surrounded a finger-profound realm cultivator who wasn't willing to be recruited by Northern Mang with another cocoon. That was also a life-and-death battle. A newborn calf was not afraid of a tiger, but a middle-aged man would be afraid of death, let alone an old man like Old Moth who had licked blood from the edge of a blade for most of his life. He began to miss the canary he kept in the private courtyard of Northern Mang more and more. Old Moth always liked to pinch her body until there were strings of bruises on her body. If he had known that he would encounter the crown prince of the Bailiang who relied on an otherworldly item to reach the false state of celestial phenomenon, he would have brought along the cocoon who was proficient in many kinds of finger mysterious arts. Otherwise, he would have invited Sword Aura whose real name was Sun Xiaopu. Murong Longshui sat cross-legged on the ground. The severity of his injuries could not be seen. He smiled at Su Fengnian and said, "I heard that you met Tuoba Chun's son on the grassland. You were besieged by him, the thunder spear Duanbua Erwi, and the colorful python brocade sleeve man. At that time, I reckon that you had just entered the Vajra realm. Unexpectedly, you killed one of them. I believe you, but I have always been curious about how you did it. Now I somewhat understand that my trip to Liang was not in vain." Su Fengnian leisurely walked toward Old Moth and said to Murong Longshui, "That time, I was chased around like a dog. Duanbua Erwi's thunder spear even pierced a hole in my body. It was a bit miserable. But to be honest, after killing the devil Xie Ling at the Duckhead Green Inn, I am not too afraid of the so-called first-grade masters. After all, I have fought with Luo Yang and the Fifth Raccoon. So, it doesn't matter whether I am a fox borrowing the tiger's might or not. I don't expect to kill all of you in one breath. But if we have to talk about who will pay a bigger price, it will definitely be you who are unfamiliar with this place after a long time." Murong Longshui stood up and said playfully, "Regarding the matter of cultivation backfeeding, there seems to be a saying that the well water does not interfere with the river water. Regarding the death of the fifth raccoon, I once asked the Qilin spiritual master about it. The imperial preceptor said that the well water in your body has dried up and there is not a drop left. Naturally, the water from the Princess Tomb's otherworldly item will flow backward. If it were someone else, their meridians would have exploded. However, I don't know if I misunderstood or if His Royal Highness is scheming against us again. He deliberately used a trick to make it seem like your well is not dry anymore. If you continue to let the Zhu robe otherworldly item instill cultivation into your well, I am afraid that it will leave irreversible sequelae. If we take risks again and again, we will eventually lose the right path of the art of war. Today, a willow horse has lost its front hooves. Tomorrow, it might be His Royal Highness who has a great king of Bailiang in his pocket. Su Fengnian stopped and said with a smile, "You can see that?" Murong Longshui was slightly stunned and seemed to be a bit annoyed. He pointed at Su Fengnian's hair and said, "Your Highness, aren't you asking the obvious? Your white hair is showing signs of turning black. Even a blind person can see it." Su Fengnian nodded and then shook his head. Using his familiar northern Mang accent, he said, "You didn't guess wrongly. After I lost the Great Yellow Court, I finally started to recover my vitality. Logically speaking, I shouldn't create unnecessary trouble at this time. However, you, Murong Longshui, the northern Mang princess, the precious daughter of Murong Baoding, came to Liyang to assassinate me. Moreover, there was Sword Chi near Huangqing, a section of Willow, and this Cobweb Senior in front of me. I don't know why you guys didn't make a move in Great Peace City and Divine Martial City, but you probably don't want to return empty-handed. Most likely, you guys will continue to oppose me shamelessly. Since I finally gained the upper hand today, even if I kill 1,000 enemies and lose 800 of my own men, I will still gain 200. After I return to Northern Liang, it doesn't matter whether I am a second-grade martial artist or a first-grade martial artist." Murong Longshui's eyes were sincere as he smiled and said, "To be honest, Spiderweb sent out 2 cocoons and several poles to the south this time. Their original intention was to assassinate your highness, but they were stopped in Great Peace City, so they didn't dare to act rashly. However, I didn't plan on getting involved in this mess from the start. I went south to investigate the demon Luo Yang's whereabouts and confirm whether Broken Spear Deng Mao and Yelu Dongchuang followed Luo Yang out of Beimang. After Han Diaoxi was killed by your highness outside of Shenwu City, Spiderweb completely gave up on the idea of fanning the flames. Instead, they turned to investigate the plans of the greatest threat to Beimang, Luo Yang. However, Su Longxiang and the little girl behind your highness made things difficult for us. We are also very troubled. After these 2 fights, Beimang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Right now, Luo Yang should have sensed that Spiderweb was going to deal with this. If Spiderweb retreated back to Beimang unscathed, Grandpa Li would be so worried that he would break many of his roots. As long as your highness is willing to watch from the side and watch the tigers fight, Murong Longshui will owe your highness a favor. How about it?" Su Fengnian said in surprise, "Isn't Yelu Dongchuang a relative of Beimang's imperial family? How did he get involved with Luo Yang? Broken Spear Deng Mao is an expert ranked even higher than Human Cat on the martial rankings. Why would he be a pawn for Luo Yang? Why don't you have the arrogance of a top expert?" Murong Longshui smiled bitterly. "What your highness is asking is exactly what I wanted to know when I secretly infiltrated Liyang." Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and joked, "Murong Longshui, our statuses are roughly the same. Look, when I went to Beimang, I killed 2 of the top 10 demons of the demonic path, as well as the Mountain Lord of Soldier Mountain. Aren't you envious?" The tall and sturdy Murong Longshui smiled sweetly. "You're a man, and I'm a woman. What's there to fight for? Sooner or later, I'll marry and become a wife. If you want to fight for your dignity, that's the duty of that stuffy Yelu Dongchuang." Su Fengnian smiled. "Straightforward, I like it. Then you can leave. Don't forget you owe me a favor." Murong Longshui smiled and asked, "Really?" Chapter 844. Su Fengnian waved his hand. Old Moth, who had been left aside for a long time, finally felt relieved. He really didn't want to fight with a reckless fake heavenly phenomenon. In Beimang, no one would give face to the king of Bailiang, Su Shao. Old Moth was reluctant to admit that this white-haired young man was able to walk out alive and even bring 2 heads home. He was even more impressed that there were talents in Jianghu. Even if Beimang had Hong Jingyan, who had already achieved great things, Tuoba Chunsun, who gradually became more courageous in the face of setbacks, and Princess Murong and little Prince Yelu. He only knew the depth of Liang Jianghu's heritage when he arrived at Liang Jianghu. Chess and sword music school's real name was Sun Xiaopu. When Taiping Ling joked that Beimang's swordplay was like rice in a barren field, Sun Xiaopu changed his name to Huang Qing. However, when he arrived at Liang, swordplay talents were like worthless weeds that were cut down again and again. The people of Liang didn't care at all, but their neighbors Beimang trembled with fear. When one's fate was flourishing, the land and water were good. When the land and water were good, talents would emerge. This was the common sense that all the dynasties followed. The empress couldn't hold back anymore. She didn't want to let the Zhao family of Liang slowly grow so that she could digest the power of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. The military god Tuoba was tricked by Luo Yang in the Arctic tundra. Even Taiping Ling, who was already the empress's teacher, was caught off guard. The empress was furious, but within a year, tens of thousands of elite cavalry were still led by the nose by white-robed Luo Yang and suffered heavy losses. In the end, she even fled to Liang. If Luo Yang turned to the Zhao family of Liang, it would definitely make Beimang's morale drop to rock bottom after the Beiliang cavalry's surprise attack on the border. Murong Longshui turned around and left casually. Old Moth was more cautious and slowly retreated. Su Fengnian stared at Old Moth and laughed softly. I said that princess can leave, but I didn't say that you can leave. Last time, a large group of Beimang assassins from the Jianghu wanted to infiltrate the border and assassinate Beiliang officials. If I remember correctly, it was Yurli Mibi who planned this. The 6 big and small leaders of the spider web personally took the lead. This debt needs to be settled clearly. Murong Longshui angrily turned around. Your Highness, isn't there no meaning in saying that? Su Fengnian said with a smile, Commandery Princess is sincere, but that old man Spiderweb is not very honest. He probably sent a secret message to Spiderweb. It is clear that he has not given up on his evil intentions. He wants to take advantage of the fact that I am alone to do something that he could not do in Great Peace City and Shenwu City. Su Fengnian flicked his sleeves, and 8 flying swords floated in front of him. Since you sent a wasp to send a message, then don't blame me for using my best sword Tomb flying swords to kill butterflies and spiders. Murong Longshui and Old Moth looked at each other and retreated at the same time. At the same time, Su Fengnian did not hesitate to follow them. He kept a close distance and did not let the 2 escape. The little girl carrying the withered sunflower followed behind Su Fengnian without saying a word. In the distance, Murong Longshui imperceptibly slowed down his footsteps and secretly checked his qi. Su Fengnian suddenly sped up and the distance between them shortened from 400 feet to 300 feet. Murong Longshui, who originally wanted to use this to test whether Su Fengnian was strong on the outside but weak on the inside, sighed and began to retreat for real. She did not believe that Su Fengnian would let her go for a favor. There were only 2 possibilities why Su Fengnian did not immediately give chase after killing a section of the willow tree. The first possibility was that he did not have enough strength and was using all his strength to fight 1 against 3. His situation was not good. If that was the case, Murong Longshui did not mind severely injuring Su Fengnian in exchange for his life. The second possibility was that this treacherous prince, who was familiar with fighting to the death, was using his old trick again. He deliberately showed weakness again so that he could easily kill her and Old Moth who were not weak. Old Moth could involve the hidden forces of Spiderweb and Su Fengnian might be able to call for reinforcements. When the time came, the outcome would still be 50-50. Su Fengnian flew through the air to chase after the 2. The young assassin he nicknamed Miss He followed behind him all the time. Su Fengnian wiped his face with his hand. His palm was full of blood. He hesitated for a moment and honestly said in a low voice, "That princess is very cunning. I have to puff myself up at my own cost. If it were not for her undying desire to kill me, I would have taken you and run away. I fought with Zhao Ningxin on the Spring God Lake, so I can't continue to let her instill her cultivation without any scruples. This is a good thing for me. The qi in my body is growing rapidly, but it is not beneficial to the current situation. It will only be a burden. In a day or 2, no matter how fast my internal energy grows, it will not be able to reach the first level. Moreover, she was heavily injured in the battle with the human cat in Shenwu City. This time, killing a section of willow was more or less a bluff. If it were not for that section of willow foolishly running into us, we would have been exposed. But don't worry, they can't kill you. If they want to kill me, even if I stand still and let them kill me, it will still not be easy. It can be said that we are in an invincible position. The only difference is how much we earn from this transaction. The young girl snorted. Su Fengyan looked into the distance. It would be best if we can capture that princess and the old man alive. Then I will make a big profit. Later we will sit down and split the loot. With our friendship, I promise I won't cheat you. The young lady kicked Su Fengyan's buttocks. The nimble and agile prince nimbly flipped through the air, continuing to steadily rush forward. She said with a light laugh, even if there are reinforcements hidden in the shadows, they wouldn't dare to rush over in such a reckless manner. Moreover, it's not like I don't have a backup plan. Let's just slowly play a game of cat and mouse with these two northern Mang great figures. I can also use this chance to nurture my strength through battle, recover my cultivation, solidify the realm I lost and then regained. You are good at finding the right time and place to attack, while Su Ying is good at capturing auras. Let's give them a good time. After an entire day of cat and mouse hunting, Murong Longshui and Old Moth were extremely sullen. Su Fengyan had always maintained a distance of half a li from them. When they rested, Su Fengyan would slowly stop and harass and provoke them from a certain distance. When they moved forward, Su Fengyan would continue to tail them. There were even 2 times when he took the initiative to intercept them. When the first attack failed, he would make a prompt decision to retreat. It wasn't that Murong Longshui didn't think of taking the initiative, but Su Fengyan didn't give her the chance at all. He was adept at chasing and killing, and when he escaped, he was even faster than anyone else. If there was a section of willow present, and both sides had a certain chance of winning, Murong Longshui and Old Moth wouldn't have been so passive. However, there weren't so many ifs in the world. In the night, Murong Longshui was washing his face by a stream in the depths of the wild forest. Su Fengyan was squatting on a large rock more than 100 feet away. He even had the leisure to worm his way into being friends with the princess of Beimeng, persuading her not to be a princess, but to find a scholarly man in Bailiang and marry him. This made her so angry that her teeth itched. At that time, Old Moth had wanted to take a detour and launch a sneak attack, but he was blocked by a red robe. 3 days later, the 2 sides entered a town one after another. Murong Longshui was still fine. With the support of his diamond body, his complexion was still good. However, Old Moth, who was on tenterhooks, couldn't help but look dispirited. Su Fengyan casually stole 2 mink hats of different sizes from the market. He put one on himself and pressed the other on the little girl's head. The furry mink hat covered her eyebrows and forehead. If the sunflower on her shoulder wasn't mentioned, she looked somewhat like an ordinary girl. Chapter 845. Murong Longshui had not had a drop of water for 3 days and 2 nights. Since he could not get rid of the pair of maggots behind him, he might as well choose a restaurant in the busy city. He took out an ingot of gold from the small pouch on his waist and tossed it to the waiter, telling him to keep the change. He ordered a table of sumptuous food and wine and sat down by the window. Whether it was his extravagant spending or her rare mountain-like figure, they were all very eye-catching. Murong Longshui did not see that bastard outside the window, so he was happy that he did not see and did not feel annoyed. He only cared about eating large pieces of meat. On the other hand, the spider moth chewed and swallowed slowly. A few diners nearby were whispering and commenting on Murong Longshui. They were not very polite and reserved in their words. The spider moth had accumulated quite a bit of anger in the past 3 days and wanted to quietly teach this group of rude people a lesson. Murong Longshui gently shook his head and drank a large mouthful of soju wine that he had never tasted before. He held it in his mouth and was not in a hurry to swallow it, slowly savoring the taste. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw an endless stream of people in the busy city. The small families were also wearing silk and satin. Murong Longshui was somewhat entranced. After the spring and autumn turmoil ended in Liang, the brocade and colored silk obtained from the western Shu, the southern Tang, the Eastern Yu, and the other 3 places amounted to millions of bolts. These years, the Zhao family of Liang was much more lax in customizing the clothes of the common people compared to the previous dynasties. Murong Longshui swallowed the wine, pursed his lips, and softly murmured, "What a picture of peace and prosperity." Behind a green wall less than 5 feet away, there were only a few pedestrians. Su Fengyan, wearing a mink hat, was squatting at the corner of the wall, chewing a scallion pancake as he muttered vaguely. Without delay, he raised his sleeve, like a small squad leader pretending to be a soldier on the battlefield, giving orders to a few flying swords floating in front of him. With a flick of his finger, 3 of the swords flew along the wall and out of the alley. In an instant, they pierced through the window and pierced straight at Murong Longshui through the window. Old Moth's finger lightly tapped on the table, and wisps of white mist appeared between the flying swords and the princess. The 3 naughty flying swords were unable to succeed, so they turned back the way they came. As soon as the first wave left, the second wave came. This time, the 3 swords came at a tricky angle, and after piercing through the window, they quickly scattered. Old Moth immediately knocked on the table in a hurry. The 3 swords came and left in a hurry, but the third wave came in the blink of an eye, never tiring. This made Old Moth, who was focused on concealment, more and more tired of dealing with them. A few sharp-eyed drinkers saw the white mist by the window and vaguely bright fireflies. Murong Longshui put down his wine bowl heavily. He had just advised Old Moth not to make a big fuss when she suddenly stood up, smashed through the window, and ran away in big strides. Everybody in the restaurant was dumbstruck. Could it be that this woman was a Jianghu heroine who had hidden her strength? Su Fengyan, who was standing at the foot of the green wall, quickly put a small half of the scallion pancake in his mouth and ran away. Murong Longshui stood in the middle of the alley, his 5 fingers hooked into the wall, crushing the bricks in his palms. His face turned ashen. Old Moth was also annoyed by Su Fengyan's endless tricks, but he did not know how to comfort that young Junju. The reason why they didn't give chase was because this kid's flying sword technique was too accurate. Within 10 zhang, the flying swords hovered just right in front of them, quietly waiting for their prey. 8 flying swords, that was the starting point of 8 traps. Old Moth could not help muttering, "It's really chasing a dog that randomly shits. Wherever you go, you have to worry about your shoes being stained with dog poop. If you don't chase, he'll just bark a few times behind your butt. He's really hard to deal with." Murong Longshui was amused by this vulgar metaphor, and the haze in his heart dissipated. At the end of the alley, that guy seemed to have noticed that the 2 did not have the intention to pursue and fight. He appeared with a mischievous smile and leaned against the wall. After finishing the scallion pancake, he casually wiped his greasy fingers on his mink hat and kindly reminded them, "You 2 immortal couples still haven't made up your mind? When I call over thousands of Bailiang cavalry, each of them spit a mouthful of saliva to drown you. Be careful not to become a pair of dying mandarin ducks, swimming in their saliva." Murong Longshui stared fixedly at that bastard who was paddling and sneered, "Don't talk nonsense." Right now, Spiderweb and the Bailiang spies have become a thorn in Zhao Guo's side. No one dares to act rashly. If you can mobilize 1,000 cavalry from Bailiang here, I, Murong Longshui, will not only obediently allow myself to be captured, but I'll also be willing to be Su Fengyan's servant. Su Fengyan laughed loudly, "You said it yourself. If you have the ability, then just wait." Tide Listening Pavilion has a Daoist scripture that records the ability to cast beans into soldiers. Do you dare to give me 3 days? When I master this ability, you'll be my servant. What a coincidence, Wutongan is lacking a sword servant. I see that you're tall and strong, but you have a strong aura. How about it? Murong Longshui gritted his teeth and squeezed out a smile. That's negotiable. Not to mention a sword, I'll even carry a spirit tablet for you in the future. Su Fengyan pretended to be angry and said, "Are you cursing me? Hey, silkworm-rearing old man, why don't you discipline your wife? How are you managing the household? Have you lived for so many years in vain? You said that I'm a dog sh*t, but when you're having sex with the princess, do you think it's romantic? I heard that you have a bad reputation in Spiderweb. The number of women you've defiled and killed can't be counted with 2 hands. This time, you're going to roam the Jianghu with the princess at the prime of her youth. Don't have any evil intentions. Living a good life is more important than anything else. Chapter 846. The still virgin Beimeng Junju laughed it off, but Old Moth was somewhat anxious. Although Spiderweb had always been loyal to Her Majesty the Empress, or to be precise, to the shadow prime minister behind Her Majesty, Li Mixi, Murong Longshue's status was particularly illustrious. If his master was humiliated, his servant would die. Moreover, His Royal Highness's mouth was full of nonsense, and he splashed dirty water on Beimeng and the Junju together. If the Junju returned to Beimeng someday and remembered this, how could Old Moth not be alarmed? Su Fengnian originally wanted to continue teasing the moth cocoon, but the arrival of the little girl made him restrain himself. Her furry mink hat was askew on her head. She squatted to the side and slowly nibbled on a scallion pancake with beef slices. Compared to Su Fengnian's scallion pancakes, it was clearly much more luxurious. The money for the scallion pancakes came from the money pouch that Su Fengnian had stolen from the streets. Jia finished chewing the scallion pancake and licked his fingers. Then, as if he was not used to the warmth of the mink hat, he tugged on it. Old Moth saw this temporary partnership in his eyes and did not find it funny at all. Instead, he was afraid and troubled. For the past few days, only Su Fengnian had acted. Old Moth believed that when the little girl recovered from her injuries, her next hand chop would fall on him and the Junju. Old Moth rubbed his brandy nose and laughed sinisterly. His Royal Highness, I heard that the consort of the King of Bailiang was originally a female sword immortal. Because she was pregnant with you, there was the white clothes case in the capital. She was left with an incurable disease and passed away early. I also heard that your eldest sister, Su Weisheng, married far away in Jiangnan and is depressed. Your second sister, Su Weisheng, is not much better. She almost died at the hands of Qin Jibao. In a few more years, the new king will replace the old one, and you'll finally become a vassal king with great difficulty. Be careful that in the end, you'll be all alone, unable to share your blessings with others. You still have to worry about the northern Mang's iron hooves coming south, while guarding against the Li Yang's obstructions. If I were you, I would have long gone mad. Not only is Beimeng preparing for war by your bedside, there is also the Zhao family's son who bears a grudge, Zhang Julu, Gu Jiantang, and a large group of loyal officials watching coldly from the sidelines. There are also several vassal kings eyeing covetously. Tell me, aren't you suffering? Su Fengnian was still leaning against the wall. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and sighed heavily. Exactly. Murong Longshue's words were shocking. His expression was calm as he said, Zhaogo has Beimeng's men of sacrifice who are in a high position. He can be considered a big shot in the capital. Many people know that this is your last stay in Jianghu. The battle outside Shenwu City may not be the end of your Jianghu. If you continue to play cat and mouse with us, be careful that the Zhao family's son will take advantage of the situation. At that time, I definitely won't mind joining forces with Zhaogo to leave your corpse in Jianghu. In short, you and I are now in a gambling situation. We are betting on whether the Zhao family's son and the important officials of Li Yang have the courage to do so. If I lose, it will only maintain the current stalemate. If you lose, you, father, and Beimeng have been holding back for more than 20 years, and it will all be for nothing. The reason why I am being so frank with you is because I have never treated you as an irreconcilable enemy. On the contrary, Su Fengnian, I admire you from the bottom of my heart. In Beimeng, only Tuoba and Dongzhuo can make me, Murong Longshue, accept wholeheartedly. Su Fengnian said carelessly, accepting wholeheartedly doesn't count as accepting. Accepting a woman's body is truly accepting. Murong Longshue ignored his frivolous words and asked calmly, Are you determined to gamble with me? Su Fengnian stretched out his hand and shook it. He shook his head and laughed. It's not a gamble. Just like how Bailiang only believes in cavalry and Bailiang's blade, I only believe in what I have earned. Murong Longshue's lips curled up as he laughed coldly, then let's wait and see. She turned around and left the alley. Old Moth was about to turn around when Su Fengnian laughed and said, 240 words, I've remembered them all. Old Moth's throat moved slightly as he spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm on the ground. He smiled mockingly at Su Fengnian and walked away. The young girl snorted. Su Fengnian didn't mind her teasing and asked curiously, "Where did your big cat go?" Jia squatted on the ground and didn't say anything. She had been silent for the past few days. No matter what Su Fengnian asked, she didn't respond. Su Fengnian squatted down and helped her adjust her mink hat. She glared at him and put her hand back. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and stood up. The two of them continued to follow Flower-like Jade and Spirited Jade. These were the nicknames that Su Fengnian had given to Su Fengnian and Old Silkworm Cocoon the day before yesterday. In Su Fengnian's words, this was called repaying evil with good. They passed by a stall on the side of the road where an old scholar had set up a stall to sell old books. There was a piece of calligraphy placed vertically with the words, "Classical Fish," on it. It was pressed down by a green prawn copper paperweight. The old scholar saw Su Fengnian and the young girl pass by and asked with a smile, "Young master, aren't you looking for books? If you don't have enough money to buy books, old hairpins can be used as money." Su Fengnian stopped and bent down to look at the calligraphy. He asked, "Old mister, does the classical fish mean otter sacrificial fish?" The old scholar smiled and nodded. "That's right. Young master is indeed knowledgeable." Su Fengnian still lowered his head and continued to ask, Jia, all homonyms are A, 3 A's, 3 A's, 3 A's, 3 A's, and 3 A's. The old scholar clicked his tongue and said, "Young master, are you talking about that Huang Longshi? This name is unlucky. It's better not to mention it." Su Fengnian looked at the expressionless little girl and then looked at the old scholar who was pretending to be mysterious. He took out a hairpin and gently placed it next to the paperweight. "Old mister, take her away. No matter how unlucky it is, it's not as unlucky as being by my side." The old Confucian scholar reached out to pick up the hairpin, but the little girl slapped the back of his hand with the sunflower. His face was full of resentment. The old man smiled and said, "I didn't take your hairpin for nothing. There's an old fart called Lu Hao who left the capital with a lackey from the Dongyue sword pool. He can enter the city in less than an hour." Su Fengnian nodded and asked, "How is Suaxia Valley?" The old man actually told him everything he knew. They're still waiting. The two old men whose ages added together are more than 200 years old are staring at each other like tortoises staring at mung beans, slowly wasting time. But in my opinion, no matter how strong his sword is, it's still not enough. What else do you want to ask? Ask them together. Zhao Huang Chao, the cowardly turtle? Lu Songtao, who's suffering from qi deviation? Or Dong Tai, who rides a donkey to see the mountains and rivers? Or Luo Yang, who helps people find deer? Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment and said with a smile, "Forget it. You two should pack up and leave as soon as possible." The old man smiled playfully and said, "You're really not afraid of death?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Once you leave, I'll quickly run away." The old man laughed loudly. "That's true." He stood up and withdrew his smile. He gently picked up the paperweight and placed it under his armpit. He shook the calligraphy and glanced sideways at Su Fengnian. "She took the fate of Mount Longhu's Zhao Xuansu for you. Whoever started the trouble should end it. You brat, hurry up and restore the Great Yellow Court. Otherwise, if she dies in 3 years, I'll make you and Bailiang suffer even if I break the rules and go against my will. Of course, you can't die today. Even if you do, you can only die in 3 years. That's why I called for a helper." The little girl didn't drag her feet at all and didn't even look back. The old man walking side by side sighed, "How heartless. Don't ask for the hairpin back." The little girl sniffled. The old man suddenly laughed. "The mink hat is not bad. It looks festive." The little girl pulled down the furry mink hat that covered her forehead and covered her entire face. Su Fengnian stood where he was and quietly watched the two leave. Before long, he turned his head and saw the white-clothed Luo Yang slowly walking over from the opposite end of the street. Chapter 847. Chapter 2 is after 11 o'clock. P.S. Every day, a hero will be selected on WeChat's public platform and a physical book with a signature in the snow will be given out. It's easy to add a friend. There's a QR code on the page of the book in the snow, or you can search for Fenghuan 1985. Su Fengnian pointed at the green-robed swordsman who was leading a horse on the street and smiled. If I'm not wrong, that should be Song Nianqing from the Daoist sword pool. Luo Yang said calmly, so what? Su Fengnian was afraid that she would not take it seriously and look down on the heroes of Jianghu, so he patiently explained with a smile, this guy is not a fame-seeking swordsman. His Xian finger realm in swordsmanship is much more solid than the Taoist priest's Xian finger realm. He's one of the few grandmasters of swordsmanship in Liang. Moreover, Song Nianqing's skills are in harmony and he's proficient in the three doctrines. He's not a brute who only knows how to use brute force, so he'll be hard to deal with. Not counting the sneaky sparring, after Song Nianqing became the head of the sword pool at a young age, he's known to have fought 19 times in the past 60 years. Every time, he would change his sword and move. One time, he brought 12 swords to compete with Wang Xianxia in the martial emperor city. Of course, he didn't win, but it was said that the fight was very grand. In the current Jianghu, Wang Xiaoping of Wudang, Qi Xianxia of Longhu Mountain, and Wu Luding of Wu family are all slightly inferior to him. Don't take it lightly. This time, he brought 14 swords in one go. It's obvious that he's going to risk his life. After losing to Wang Xianxia, he's been in seclusion for years. His realm must have improved a lot. You should pay more attention to him. Don't treat him like a cat or a dog. However, Luo Yang's words made Su Fengnian choke. Can he be compared to Dong Tai? Su Fengnian's eyes and ears were very clear. He didn't know why he didn't notice Lu Haosher's presence. Could it be that this old dog from the Zhao family thought that Song Nianqing alone was enough to kill him? The sword mound of the Wu family and the Daoist sword pool had never been regarded as factions of the martial arts world. Aside from the fact that few people from both sides traveled to Jianghu, the other reason was that these two giant trees of the sword forest were simply too tall. Even a sect like the Snowy Manor, which was second to none in the province, could only bow its head before these two behemoths. After the sword mound of the Wu family defeated 10,000 riders with 9 swords, it declined from its peak. The Daoist sword pool had always wanted to suppress the Wu family, which was known to be the best swordsman in the world. They even took the initiative to flirt with the Liyang imperial court. Li Yibai, the leader of the younger generation of the sword pool, appeared at the Snowy Manor with 18 sword maids to promote the Wild Goose Castle. Su Fengnian didn't have a good impression of the sword pool, but he treated Li Yibai quite well. When he first traveled the Jianghu, he saw an honest man from afar. His moves were simple and not flashy. At that time, Su Fengnian didn't think that it was a high-level swordsmanship. He only thought that this man was good and didn't put on airs. Later, he found out that he was a talented swordsman who had the potential to become the leader of the sword pool. Therefore, when he attacked the Snowy Manor, he only found trouble with the Spring Invitation Cottage and the Wild Goose Castle. Li Yibai's master, the current leader of the Daoist sword pool, Song Nianqing, left the sword pool for the first time in nearly 30 years. He took 14 famous swords with him. It seemed that he wouldn't stop until he took Su Fengnian's head. Su Fengnian asked softly, "Why don't you wait for a while and let me test his strength?" Luo Yang sneered and said, "Are you afraid that I will easily kill Song Nianqing and alert the enemy, and Lu Haosher will become a coward and ruin your plan of being the Oriole behind? I find it strange. With your current skills, fighting Master Lu Hao is like hitting a rock with an egg. What? Do you want me to help you when you are beaten half to death? Let me say this first. Even if I help you, it will be after Master Lu Hao kills you and then I will help you collect your corpse." Su Fengnian grinned and smiled brightly. "I'm not that particular. I just feel that since there is going to be a fight, there is no reason for me to hide in the back." Luo Yang clicked her tongue and said, "I remember now. Outside Dunhuang, someone defended the city gate with a sword and blocked hundreds of cavalry. Then he swaggered into the city. How impressive!" Su Fengnian said shamelessly, "A real man doesn't talk about his past glory. Why are you talking about this?" Outside the window, groups of armored cavalry appeared on the street. Without any explanation, they drove the people out of the city. At first, there were some rich noblemen and scholars who cursed and swore. In the end, they were smashed to the ground by the end of their iron spears and dragged away like dead dogs. Many of the common people who stayed in their homes were also unable to escape. In the bitter cold winter, they were driven out of the city gate in groups. Some of the members of the big families in the neighborhood were also not lucky enough to escape. After the confluence, they wanted to gang up and cause trouble, but when they saw that the old masters of the government and county yamen were also in the group of refugees, they did not have the courage to cause trouble. Not long after, the area around the restaurant was almost empty. The diners of the restaurant had already run out. The shopkeeper did not care about the money owed by the group of ruffians and hurriedly left with his family. Some ruffians wanted to fish in troubled waters. While the people in the city were empty, they went to the rich people's houses to steal some antiques and valuables. As a result, the patrolling cavalry from outside the city saw them and killed them on the spot. A few ruffians with nimble legs saw that the situation was not good and tried to escape by jumping over the wall. They were directly shot by arrows and turned into hedgehogs. For a moment, the people were even more anxious. They did not know what had happened. They all thought that there was going to be a war again. The old people who had experienced the war of the spring and autumn period were frightened and cried. The women and children who came with their ancestors were also crying. The people on the street scattered. The old man in green with a pile of swords on the back of his horse was very eye-catching. When Su Fengnian stood up and looked at the street, the old man also looked up. After their eyes met, Song Yanqing did things quickly. Without saying anything, he let go of the reins and took a long sword from the horse's back. He gently drew a half arc in the direction of the second floor of the restaurant. Chapter 848. Su Fengnian had jumped up high the moment Song Yanqing made his first move. He held the beam of the room with one hand. Luo Yang, who was sitting on the chair, was much more elegant than him. She didn't move at all. That crescent-shaped sword aura sliced through the outer wall of the restaurant like cutting tofu and went straight for Luo Yang. Luo Yang gently pushed that colored glaze cup with one finger. It slid forward an inch on the table. The person, the table, and the chair were like a fish cutting through the ripples, forcing the sharp sword aura to slide to the sides. This sword aura cut through the back wall of the restaurant and pierced through the clouds for more than 30 meters before it slowly dissipated. Half of the restaurant slid down at an angle. Some tiles and broken wood bounced off several meters away from Luo Yang. Su Fengnian naturally wouldn't fall with the collapsed restaurant. He let go of the beam and landed beside Luo Yang. He glanced at this woman who made him speechless and didn't know what to say. Su Fengnian could take Song Yanqing's probing sword attack head-on. Of course, it wouldn't be as easy for him as it was for Luo Yang. Moreover, Song Yanqing's first move was more of a greeting than a fight. It had the flavor of the sword pool welcoming guests with peaceful means before resorting to force. After reaching the finger-profound realm, his control of qi was much better than that of the Vajra realm. Luo Yang played her flute beside the spring god lake. She could sense the level of everyone's realm through the flute's sound. It was this trick. Only Luo Yang dared to take Song Yanqing's sword attack head-on. After Song Yanqing's first move, as long as the opponent took it head-on, he wouldn't be able to accurately deduce the opponent's realm. Instead, he would be able to roughly know the opponent's realm. Then the second and third sword attacks wouldn't be inferior to the opponent's, which would be more beneficial to his sword heart illumination. The restaurant became like a simple tavern without any shelter, revealing the man and woman on the second floor. Song Yanqing was just like the rumors. He immediately sheathed his sword and placed one hand on the other scabbard. He asked loudly, "This old man is Song Yanqing of the sword pool of Dongyue. May I ask who is upstairs?" The person the old grandmaster asked seriously was naturally not His Royal Highness, who the world knew. In the Jianghu, regardless of whether it was an expert or a novice, most people had the habit of asking about the details of their opponents. What their nicknames were, who their masters were, and what their backgrounds were. This wasn't an unnecessary move. Apart from those nobodies who liked to give themselves famous nicknames that could be ignored, the rest of the people in the Jianghu were quite rare to have nicknames that weren't vulgar. They all relied on their abilities and gold and silver to earn their nicknames. Everyone in the Jianghu was in the same profession. Whether it was to make a living or to make a living, being kind to others wasn't a wrong thing to do. When faced with people who had been famous for a long time, Most people didn't want to offend them to the point of death. Therefore, many people in the Jianghu who didn't know when to back down would often be able to turn hostility into friendship after a word of disagreement. In fact, they didn't even fight, but they still glorified it as no discord, no concord. Those who were popular in the Jianghu were definitely old foxes who were good at making friends from both sides. Even if the hotheads had good cultivation, they didn't understand the principle of not looking at the monk's face and would often suffer many unnecessary losses. Many Jianghu people who had a bright future were stubborn. They didn't know when to advance or retreat after provoking rich and powerful enemies, and in the end, they didn't even know how they died. Song Nianqing, who was one of the top swordsmen in the world's sword forest, was no exception. That young woman in white really shocked him. Since when did Li Yang have such a woman who hid her strength so well? Su Fengyan coldly snorted and said, "She's my friend. What's wrong?" Luo Yang glanced at Su Fengyan from the corner of her eyes. How could she not know this guy's little scheme? If she bluntly revealed her identity, she was afraid that no matter how conceited Song Nianqing was, he would have to think twice. Then this guy's wishful thinking might not be successful. Su Fengyan was still singing a one-man show. Surnamed Song, if you have the ability, then try to climb the tower. Don't try to worm your way into being friends with us. In the past, you carried 12 swords to Wu Wu City, but didn't you come back empty-handed? So what if you have 2 more swords today? If you have the ability, then use all 14 swords. I'll say it right here, we'll take all of them. Luo Yang calmly asked, "Aren't you bored? Aren't you ashamed?" Su Fengyan turned his head and laughed in a low voice. It's not easy to get the thigh of the number 1 person of the evil path. Let me show it off. Su Fengyan's frivolous words didn't anger Song Nianqing. His state of mind was as calm as an ancient well, and he didn't respond to Su Fengyan. He just lightly patted the scabbard. This time, he didn't hold the sword in his hand, but instead rode it 20 feet away from his hand. The sword's aura was much stronger than the first sword. The tip of the sword was slightly raised, and it swept towards Su Fengyan on the second floor. Luo Yang stood up. She obviously wasn't in the mood to wait for the dozen or so swords. She jumped down from the restaurant and brushed past the flying sword. Then, she held the hilt with one hand. The long sword vibrated incessantly, and the sound could be heard all over the city. Song Nianqing grasped the third sword hanging on the horse's back. He didn't panic because Luo Yang had caught his unsheathed sword. Instead, he smiled knowingly. This sword was called Hoary Head. People of the world couldn't escape the fate of separation when they turned white. When the sword and the sword's aura were unsheathed, they were separated. Breaking one of them wouldn't affect the overall situation. Song Nianqing's second sword was originally pointed at Su Fengyan, but the sword's aura was drawn towards the beautiful and valiant woman in white. Moreover, the white sword didn't differentiate between the two. As long as Su Fengyan hastily attacked, any impact and qi he exerted on the long sword could be transferred to the sword's aura. This was the essence of the hoary head sword. If one was the first to sense the sword's aura and block it, the same principle would apply. Luo Yang suddenly clenched her 5 fingers, and the long sword in her hand suddenly stopped wailing. The perfect sword embryo was broken, but her means were swift and fierce. It was tantamount to adding fuel to the fire for the sword's aura lurking in the dark. Su Fengyan didn't realize the mystery until the sword's aura suddenly approached. He cursed. It wasn't clear whether he was cursing Song Nianqing for being treacherous or blaming Luo Yang for deliberately tricking him. 8 flying swords came out of her sleeve like a thunder pool. The woman who tricked Su Fengyan secretly raised the corner of her mouth. She held the long sword that had completely lost its spirit upside down, landed lightly on the ground, and ran towards Song Nianqing. The sword's aura in her hand soared to more than 10 feet. It was as thick as the mouth of a bowl and like the tail of a comet. It was domineering. Song Nianqing was shocked. He was only holding the sword in his right hand, but he immediately added a sword to his hand. Luo Yang, who was holding the long sword upside down, released the hilt and threw the long sword and the sword's aura at Song Nianqing. In fact, it was more like a smash. Chapter 849. The sword and sword qi were like a painter splashing ink onto the ground. The sword qi was so strong that before Song Nianqing's second sword could get close, it had already been crushed into powder. Song Nianqing did not retreat but advanced instead. His feet were only a few inches off the ground, and he advanced more than 10 feet. When he stopped, he twisted his toes, and the new pair of plain green cloth shoes slid on the ground, kicking up a cloud of dirt. His left hand held the sword behind his back, and his right hand held the sword in front of his chest. He then pointed downwards, and the tip of the sword went from downwards to upwards, pressing against the bottom of the sword qi. The sword in Song Nianqing's hand gradually bent, and bit by bit, he changed into the collapsing sword style. The tip of the sword was not higher than his head, and with a light shout he actually flicked the condensed sword force over his head, landing on the street and creating a bottomless pit. The sword pool sect master's sword did not straighten, and maintained a slightly bent collapsing sword style. He let go of the sword, and before the sword fell, the tip of his left hand collided with the middle of the sword that was hovering in the air. There was a clang, like the sudden sound of a temple's morning bell, melodious and loud. Luo Yang moved forward at a moderate pace, and with a casual wave of her arm, she blocked the sword qi that came from the collision of the swords. Song Nianqing quickly changed from a straight collision to a horizontal one, and the second sound was like the evening drum, extremely dull. Striking the morning bell, striking the night drum, the sound of the drum kills, the bell absorbs the soul. Song Nianqing had secretly entered the Jianghu 20 years ago, and when he was traveling he stayed in a nameless ancient temple and learned it after hearing the morning bell and evening drum. Song Nianqing repeated the boring collision without stopping, and in an instant he had struck it 108 times. Luo Yang continued to move forward, and in the end, she was even stingy with raising her hand. There were continuous explosions in front of her, and everywhere she passed, the sound of the bell, drum, and sword would destroy everything. The original meaning was to sound the drum and listen to the sound, and to return quickly, and not violate the rules. But since Luo Yang could kill her way through Beimeng alone twice, what was a small noise of the bell, drum, and sword qi? Song Nianqing's two swords finally couldn't withstand the force of the collision. The two swords broke and fell to the ground. Song Nianqing didn't turn back to retrieve the swords from the horse's back. Instead, he formed a sword seal that resembled both Buddha and Tao. Riding the swords out of their sheaths, the three swords left their sheaths one after the other, leaped up from the horseback, like a long rainbow falling on top of Luo Yang's head. Song Nianqing's hair and beard stood on end. His green robe fluttered violently, and his feet sank a foot into the ground. Luo Yang was simply arrogant to the point of being unreasonable. With her hands behind her back, she stomped on the ground, shattering the bluestone slabs and sending the gravel flying. It was exactly the same as the first battle with Dong Tai in Dunhuang City. However, at that time, she stomped on the ground, shaking up thousands of raindrops to form 1,000 white swords. Every time a sword pierced towards her, it would be deflected by a stone a few feet away. In the 30 steps that Luo Yang had taken, the three swords had already returned without any results more than 60 times. The tips of the swords had long been broken, and the distance between her and Song Nianqing had shortened to less than 10 feet. Song Nianqing pressed his hands down, and the three swords that were half of their original length pierced towards Luo Yang at the same time, making a final struggle. Luo Yang brushed her hand and casually grasped the three flying swords that were like arrows at the end of their flight. She continued to move forward slowly. However, unlike the first sword that was crushed by her on the spot, the three swords didn't lose their vitality in her hand. Instead, the sword qi grew like bamboo shoots after the rain, thriving and thriving. Luo Yang looked down as she walked slowly. Even though she sensed the scene of a snake devouring an elephant in her hand, she didn't have any response. The sword qi of the three swords took root in her palm. Song Nianqing squinted his eyes and snapped his fingers. That old horse was familiar with its owner's habits. It trod lightly on its hooves and came to the side of the elderly man. Song Nianqing took out the only sword with a sword tassel among the 14 swords. The sword's body was as clear as a mirror, which was why it was named Zhao Dan. Back when he ascended Marshal the Arch City with the 12 swords, Song Nianqing was just a rookie of the sword forest that had just entered the pugilistic world. Wang Xianxia was already recognized as the world's #1. However, when did Song Nianqing take a step back? The Zhao Dan in his hand was the first sword that Song Nianqing had personally forged after going into seclusion. Every swordsman was a swordsmith. They had to forge their own swords in the sword furnace. Although the sword pool had millions of swords, they were only used to remember the ancestors. Ever since Song Nianqing, the sword pool didn't allow any of the sect's juniors to revere the past and belittle the present. This was why many visitors to the Sword Dao all sighed that the sword pool no longer has any ancient swords. With the Zhao Dan in his hand, Song Nianqing's heroic spirit was overflowing. His sword heart was even clearer. The white-clothed woman walked forward step by step. It seemed like she didn't take the initiative to make a move. She was forced by the situation. However, Song Nianqing wasn't relaxed. She didn't stop at each step. The more leisurely she walked, the greater the disturbance it caused to Song Nianqing's mental state. Song Nianqing didn't take any other swords and only took the Zhao Dan. Wasn't this a sign that he valued that woman? Chapter 850. While Song Nianqing was accumulating his power, he looked at the woman of unknown origin. The previous 3 swords were named Time, Place, and People. They were specially designed to deal with Xian Qi and even celestial state masters. They could forcibly absorb Qi and become stronger when faced with a strong opponent. Every time Song Nianqing comprehended a move, he would forge a new sword. He had been diligent in forging and nurturing swords all these years. He had poured a lot of effort into each of the 14 swords, complemented by original sword moves. They were all worthy of being called new swords. They were truly unprecedented. If an opponent of the same state underestimated him, he would definitely suffer a great loss. Song Nianqing had originally hoped to nurture 20 swords in his life and leave the final battle to Dong Tai or Wang Xianxia. However, he could not disobey the emperor's order. He had to break out of seclusion and wander the Jianghu in a green robe with swords. However, he did not think that the crown prince of Bailiang could bear the 14 swords. Song Nianqing suddenly widened his eyes. Time, place, and people. What's the harm in giving them all to you? The woman in white sneered. Her qi poured into the 3 swords like a flood. The purple, yellow, and white sword qi, as thick as an arm, circled wildly in her palms. The 3 swords suddenly cried out. It was a happy thing for a hungry man to eat his fill. However, if he died from eating too much, it would be a tragedy. The 3 shockingly chaotic sword qis instantly vanished into thin air. Song Nianqing exclaimed, "What a celestial state! Good, good, good." The 2 were only 70 or 80 feet apart. Instead of being angry, the sword pool sect master smiled. He closed his eyes and gently touched the sword of courage in front of his chest with 2 fingers. He muttered to himself, "Old brother, the 7 swords who walked in front of you didn't die in vain." Luo Yang clapped her hands and laughed. "Dongyue sword pool has hundreds of years of history and this is all you've got?" Song Nianqing did not open his eyes. He smiled and said, "Watch me carry the lamp to see the world." The old man in a green robe handed out his sword. The next scene was not shocking. In the eyes of outsiders, it would only be funny. It was like a child who had just started to practice swordsmanship. He could barely lift the heavy sword in his hand and staggered around. His steps were messy and the momentum of his sword was distorted. Although his figure and sword moves were chaotic, his speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the distance of 70 to 80 feet had been reduced to a distance of 2 sword moves. When people practice swordsmanship, their seniors and great teachers would always advise them not to be controlled by the sword. That kind of swordsmanship would never amount to anything. Song Nianqing, who could be counted as one of the few great grandmasters in the way of the sword, did the opposite. He moved with his sword. There was no majestic sword aura that surged like a bull, nor was there a vast and righteous sword will. Just like that, he arrived in front of Luo Yang. Luo Yang frowned and shot out a palm. Under the influence of the sword of Zhao Dan, Song Nianqing actually dodged Luo Yang's palm. The tip of his sword was aimed at her shoulder. For the first time, Luo Yang left the central axis of the street. She took a step sideways and pinched the tip of the sword of Zhao Dan with 2 fingers. Before Luo Yang could exert her strength, the tip of the sword twisted. Song Yanqing's body spun and a splendid sword flower blossomed. Luo Yang flicked her finger. Song Yanqing withdrew his sword and turned half a circle to attack Luo Yang's back. This time, Luo Yang did not attack. Her feet did not move and her body fell backward. The sword had clearly missed, but the sword qi exploded like a firecracker where Luo Yang fell. Luo Yang's feet were still on the ground, but she turned her body to the left and barely dodged the sword qi. However, Song Yanqing did not show mercy. His long sword continued to entangle endlessly. For a moment, the sword qi around the two of them was like a cloud. It was too much for the eyes to take in. Luo Yang finally took a step forward. The sword qi of Zhao Dan in Song Yanqing's hand also began to show its magnificence. The ground of the street and the buildings on both sides of the street were smashed into pieces. Dust rose everywhere. Luo Yang walked and stopped, allowing the majestic sword qi to wreak havoc. She smiled and said, "It seems to be traceless, but in fact, it follows the winding of the world's dragon veins. It can be said that I have touched the threshold of the celestial state." The two of them resumed Luo Yang's position in the south of the northern Song dynasty. The demoness in white who disturbed the Jianghu of Beimang and Liang held the sword to her neck tightly. Song Yanqing suddenly opened his eyes and shouted angrily. He took a step forward and pushed the tip of the sword 3 feet forward. Luo Yang calmly took a small step back. The tip of the sword was less than 2 feet away from her neck. The abundant upstanding qi that came out of the sword messed up 2 strands of hair on her temples. Her sleeves fluttered as she held the sword. Luo Yang, who was not flustered at all, ignored the blood flowing from her palm. She looked straight at Song Yanqing and said with a smile, "Where did you get so many celestial state fingers? Get out." Luo Yang held the sword edge tightly and pushed it back. Song Yanqing, who refused to give up the sword, was hit in the heart by the sword hilt. Luo Yang seemed to be angry at his indiscretion and kicked the old man in green in the chest. The cloth shoes were worn thin by the ground. Song Yanqing, whose feet were off the ground, was almost at the same level with the sword. He pushed the tip of the sword 2 feet away from the woman in white's neck. "I gave you an inch and you wanted a mile." Luo Yang actually moved the tip of the sword 1 foot closer to her neck. She sneered and then slapped down with her palm. She directly broke the long sword with her palm. Since the sword was broken, Song Yanqing had to retreat. Luo Yang did not bother to beat a drowning dog. She casually threw away the broken sword and let Song Yanqing rush back to the old horse with the sword. Song Yanqing was hit in the heart by the sword hilt and kicked. Blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. He tried to calm down. The old man's face was full of disbelief. If he was fighting against Wang Xianxia, the #1 in the world, he would be in such a sorry state. But how could an unknown young woman in Jianghu be so domineering? Or was it because he was too ignorant? What the woman in white said next really made Song Yanqing flustered and exasperated. As an old man who occupied a place in the sword world, no matter how good he was at maintaining his composure, he could not stay calm. "I'll teach you how to use the sword." Chapter 851. On the second floor of the restaurant, Luo Yang added fuel to the fire of the sword qi that was connected to the sword. The sword qi instantly surged, startling Su Fengyan. He hurriedly manipulated the 8 swords to form a lightning pool to defend himself. The sword qi and the sword qi seemed to be fighting against each other. The sword qi struck the flying swords, producing incessant tinkling sounds. Su Fengyan's actions were also unexpected. He was not in a hurry to destroy the sword qi. Instead, he fought and retreated. He moved around on the second floor, chipping away at the sword qi bit by bit until the sword qi was completely eliminated. After that, Luo Yang went downstairs and pressed on. Song Yanqing could not care less about the person upstairs. The 2 swords of morning bell and evening drum, followed by the 3 swords of favorable timing, favorable location, and favorable person, followed by the sword illuminating courage, totaling 8 swords. They were all worthy of being called new swords. Especially the 3 swords that stole the celestial phenomenon realm and the sword illuminating courage that followed. They were all eye-opening to Su Fengyan. Putting aside the unconventional flying swordsmanship, Su Fengnian's swordsmanship could barely be considered to have reached a higher level. However, he had a good eye. Song Xianxia of the sword pool handed over sword after sword according to the prescribed order. Even though Su Fengnian had been carefully guarding against Master Lu Hao, who was hiding in the shadows, he did not dare to take his eyes off of it. Looking at swords was like admiring calligraphy. A layman might only think that the calligraphy was written with dragon and snake strokes, but if it was him holding the brush, he would not be able to grasp the essence of calligraphy. This was why most people in Jianghu wanted to be guided by a master. Su Fengnian was like a spectator who often watched calligraphy. Some of the calligraphy that entered his eyes were graceful and charming, some were clear and vigorous, some had a solemn atmosphere. However, they all happened to be pleasing to him. Su Fengnian had an arrogant thought that no one knew about. He hoped that one day he could forge a furnace and form a sword altar and a large peak. There were not many trees on the peak, but they must all reach the sky. Su Fengnian glanced at old Ma, who was carrying a sword on his back on the street. He wondered if Song Xianxing's remaining 6 moves could cross Xianji and reach celestial phenomenon. If he stayed at Xianji, it would be impossible for him to hurt Luo Yang. Luo Yang was not a member of the 3 sections. She was a real martial artist. Like Wang Xianji, she was extremely domineering. She had fought Tuoba Bodhisattva, Deng Tea, and Hong Jingyan, who were the top 5 experts in the new martial arts ranking. She had even pulled Hong Jingyan down from the 4th position and replaced him. Against such a flawless demoness, even Celestial Phenomenon Sword would not have a 50% chance of winning, let alone Xianji. After a short moment of anger, Song Xianxia sighed and said, "This old man has poor eyesight and has been in seclusion all year round. I didn't expect to become a frog at the bottom of the well. Only now did I remember that there was a woman in white blocking useless monk by the green crossing river. I finally guessed your identity. I don't know if it's too late." Luo Yang said she wanted to teach Song Xianxia a sword, but she did not take out a sword from anywhere. She also did not use any external object to make a sword. She just put her left hand across her chest with her palm facing up and her right hand slowly pressed down. Song Xianxia, who was standing beside the horse, looked up at the gray sky. He wiped the 6 swords hanging on the horse's back. The swords were not out of their sheaths. 3 swords pointed to the ground while the other 3 hung in the air. They fell randomly in all directions, looking messy. Song Xianxia muttered to himself, "This old man has been holding a sword all his life. He only saw it as a troublesome matter to pass on the incense. He was afraid that it would delay the progress of his swordsmanship. 40 years ago, he had a hint of enlightenment and almost achieved the sword of celestial sword. 20 years ago, by chance, I was watching the sea of clouds rise and fall in a blessed place. A red sun rose from the east, as if it had suddenly jumped into the world. I was touched again, but I still gave up on that sword. Since then, he went into seclusion. He only wanted to progress step by step. He wanted to enter celestial phenomenon before becoming a celestial immortal. Gradually, he learned that this old man was born in the sword pool. The first sword he chose was a peerless sword. The first sword manual he received was a top-notch secret manual. The first time he cultivated his inner strength was also a peerless heart mantra. The master who taught me swordsmanship was a grand master of swordsmanship. Everything went smoothly for him, but his swordsmanship cultivation was left far behind by some people who came from the countryside. Only then did he know that everything would cry out when there was injustice. This old man did not have any injustice in his heart, so how could he resonate with heaven and earth? Luo Yang did not care about Song Xianxing's enlightenment, nor did she care about the 6 swords standing between heaven and earth. Her palms seemed to be pressed together, but there was still a gap. A vision of heaven and earth. Su Fengnian sucked in a breath of cold air. The highest point in the city was the bell tower of a Daoist temple. The sharp eaves of the tower seemed to be pressed down by an invisible celestial being and snapped. Immediately after, the bell tower collapsed in an unusually smooth manner. The 1,000-year-old tower in the city, second only to the bell tower of the Daoist temple, also began to collapse. All the taller buildings in the city began to collapse together, showing a scene of being cut down by a knife. The huge city was like a piece of tofu on a chopping board, easily cut by a knife. The more it was cut, the thinner it became. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian did not dare to stay on the second floor. He floated to the ground, only to hear the ear-piercing noise of thousands of kilograms of gravity-crushing wood and stone. Su Fengnian gently stamped his foot and then laughed bitterly. Not only was the heavens moving down, but the ground was also restless. It was like a great Buddha overlooking heaven and earth with its palms pressed together. There was nowhere to hide. Heaven and earth were in harmony, leaving only a line. This line was Luo Yang's sword. Song Yanqing's expression was grave. The 3 swords in the air pierced upwards, while the 3 swords on the ground penetrated downwards. Clearly, he was doing his best to assume a mighty posture of indomitable spirit. This line between heaven and earth was still 3 zhang high. Needless to say, the high walls of the city had long been completely destroyed. The elite cavalry that had been transferred from outside the city to clear out the city had really hit the mark by a stroke of luck. If not for their foresight, under the might of Luo Yang's mighty sword, the nearly 10,000 corpses would have been nailed to the ground. The more the situation was settled, the more Su Fengnian did not forget that Lu Haosher, Murong Longshui, and Spiderweb Moth were still hidden in the city. Murong Longshui and the old man were indeed in the city, and they were not far from here. They were 3 streets away. Murong Longshui was sitting on the wall of a low alley. He had gotten a pot of wine from somewhere and was sitting cross-legged on it. He used his robe to wrap it up and eat. Old Moth stood in the middle of the alley and did the same action as Su Fengnian. He stomped hard and the entire alley's bluestone slabs cracked. The old man sighed and said, "Who would have thought that after the battle between Luoyang and Bodhisattva Tuoba in the icy plains of the extreme north, his methods had become even more vicious. Princess, with her here, do we still have to interfere? I'm just afraid of pulling chestnuts out of the fire. Before we can eat the roasted chestnuts, we'll get into trouble instead." Murong Longshui bent his finger and flicked a few peanuts, one near and one far. He watched them explode and said, "This immortal's method of controlling heaven and earth is the same as borrowing a sword from the Great Snow Plateau. After all, it's not invulnerable. Sword, immortal swords are invincible. You and I are destined to be discovered, but it's not impossible to fight for a chance of survival. Right now, I'm just afraid that the guard dog of the Zhao family in Great Peace City will act shamelessly and insist on waiting for Luo Yang to deal with us before making a move. But then it'll be even harder for him to kill Su Fengnian. It'll depend on Lu Haosher's decision. Presumably, Su Fengnian's head should be worth more than the 2 of us combined. Besides, I heard that this old man has a personal grudge with the Bailiang. In short, let's watch from afar. Luo Yang's temperament is unpredictable. If we annoy her, I don't want to die in Liyang." Murong Longshui landed softly in the alley. Old Moth had already left quickly. The tall and strong Junju glanced at Old Moth's hurried back and smiled. On the street, Song Yanqing's 3 swords in the air started to fall, the 3 swords in the ground started to rise. All 6 swords trembled and wavered. Song Yanqing closed his eyes and focused. A person had 7 orifices. Every time a sword broke, the sword master, Song Yanqing, would bleed from one orifice. When all 6 swords were broken, Song Yanqing's eyes, ears, and arms were bleeding profusely. The miserable state of this great swordsman was truly frightening. But Song Yanqing's expression was still calm. Since only 6 of his 7 orifices were bleeding, it meant that other than the 14 swords on horseback on the surface, the number 1 of the sword pool, Song Yanqing, most likely had another sword hidden. When Song Yanqing finally spoke and attacked, Su Fengnian, who was most likely leaving behind his last words, had only guessed half right. The Junju and Old Moth were in the city, but Lu Haosher was not hiding in the city. 10 li away from the city. An old man with an old-fashioned face stood where he was. When Luo Yang's hands began to close the sky and the earth, he began to move his feet extremely slowly. The first step was not even half of an ordinary person's step. The second step was slightly faster, no different from an ordinary person's. The third step was the distance of an ordinary person's 2 steps. And so on and so forth. The sky and the earth were like thunder, rushing towards the city. Chapter 852. Shenjiafang was one of the best villas in Tianyuan. It had many people, deep mountains and remote rivers, and cultivated diligently while avoiding war. Its feng shui was extraordinary. An old man and a young girl walked through the fields. It was cold and frosty, but the fields were not soft. There were some shriveled eggplants on the fields. The old man bent down to pick a few and put them in his pocket. The young girl behind him wore a cheap mink hat and looked back from time to time. The old man was still talking to himself. Don't look at the eggplants now. After being frosted, they are sweet when they enter the mouth. The taste is no worse than the crucian carp in winter and can compete with the winter bamboo shoots. Later, find a family and I will personally cook a pot for you. Shen Jiafang owed me a big favor. Back then, I was the one who picked this treasured land for them. Not to mention a few worthless eggplants, even if it was a few lives, I would have taken them away just like that. You don't look at me. Since I found Luo Yang as a helper for that boy, his life and death are 50-50. Don't stare at me. Yes, I let him fall into this trap, but he made my daughters suffer such a big loss. If I don't scheme against him, who will I scheme against? As for me, generally speaking, I don't help anyone. Even though the emperor of Dongyue indulged in sensual pleasures, I still managed to protect most of the Dongyue imperial family. The last emperor of southern Tang worked hard to govern the country and had great talent and vision. He could be considered a wise ruler. But now, everyone in southern Tang has the surname Hong. According to the logic that people of the present age like to talk about, the shady business that I did was completely unreasonable. When I asked you to assassinate that boy, I told you that he was unlucky and would die sooner or later. Rather than dying on a woman's belly or in the hands of others, it would be better to die in your hands. At least his body would be intact and there would be a place to be buried. Compared to the thousands of lonely souls and wild ghosts, how could it be worse? It would have been better if the old man didn't say anything. Once he said these principles that were drier than eggplants, the young girl simply stopped walking. She carried the sunflower and looked at the city dozens of miles away. The old man was embarrassed and reached out to grab a handful of sunflower seeds. The young girl twisted her body in a fit of pique and spun around with the withered sunflower, not letting him have his way. The old man was surprised and squinted his eyes. He saw that the city in the distance was swaying in the wind and rain. His sea of qi rumbled and fell, as if heaven and earth were squeezing a line. He sighed and rubbed his daughter's mink hat and whispered, "It is the heartless people are the most infatuated." The old man didn't get any response. Fortunately, he was already used to it. He weighed the eggplants in his pocket and found that it wasn't enough for lunch, so he picked a few more. Only then did he talk to himself. If the 20 to 30,000 people in the city can't be dispersed in time, Luo Yang's move will incur the wrath of heaven and the wrath of men. The people of the three religions and Longhu Mountain can't even fend for themselves. But according to Li Xiaoxin's temperament of the two Zen temples, he will definitely make a move. Before entering first pin, especially below second pin, there is a simple way to break through the armor. One punch will break through the armor, and one sword will pierce through the armor. It is clear at a glance. But after entering second pin, especially after first pin, there is no such thing as this method is too inflexible. People are alive. Dong Tai's sword can be said to be the pinnacle of swordsmanship. It can easily break through thousands of armors. However, if the person wearing the armor knows martial arts, the power will be greatly reduced. If Wang Xianxia wears the armor, even Dong Tai can't easily break through the armor. Could Dong Tai be a beginner in swordsmanship? The sages of the three religions are blessed by heaven. Li Xiaoxin cut the river to send a gift to Daoist sect. If the river water was thrown down, it wouldn't be difficult to drown thousands of Beimang people. But how could it drown a few second-pin martial artists? This is the reason why the sages of the three religions don't enter the martial arts evaluation. If they want to borrow the power of heaven and earth, they have to act according to God's will. Wang Xianxia and Tuoba don't need to do that. In the past 200 to 300 years, there are only 3 cases where the sages of the three religions killed more than one person. The first one was when the Wu family broke through 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords. The second one was when Li Chungang broke through 2,600 armors with one sword. The last one was when Luo Yang went south not long ago. Not only were the opponents fully equipped with armors, but they were also skilled in martial arts. Especially the latter two, after reaching the celestial state, even if it wasn't as obvious as the sages of the three religions, they would more or less be influenced by fate. Sometimes, killing a nameless pawn would cause more trouble than killing a general. Zhao Go took the lead to send the elite cavalry to drive away the people in the city. This is mostly the idea of Master Lu Hao. An old man who doesn't die is a thief, and a thief is a coward. Master Lu Hao is afraid that Luo Yang will be unscrupulous when she attacks. When the purple thunder strikes, even if Luo Yang bears 70 to 80% of the damage, he will be affected by it. However, he has stayed in the celestial state for too long and is suspected of being a follower of the emperor, so he will still be punished. You should know that the saying that those who don't know are not guilty is most suitable for those in the celestial state. The people of the three religions, because they know too many secrets of heaven that they can't reveal, have their hands tied. Luo Yang's time in the celestial state is relatively short, and she is not a member of the three religions, so she can do whatever she wants. The girl squatted on the ground and silently kneaded the mud. Huang Longshi, who occupied the top 3 ranks of spring and autumn, exhaled a mouthful of fog and said softly, "Those who don't know me ask what I want. Who knows who I am? Sun Ping knows the half-tongue of Great Pea City, but we have different ideals and paths. Li Shan, the poison warrior of Baoyang, knows, but 2 tigers cannot live on one mountain. There is no place for him in Liyang. Nalen Yusi also knows, but he is born the opposite of me. The scholar rules the country, the scholar rules the world, and the scholar brings disaster to the country. These 3 people each have their own desires, and I'm afraid this is the last bright time for the strategists. In the future, we won't be able to see such a scene of our generation of scholars turning the world upside down. In the future, the scholars are all actors in the imperial family." The old man with a full bag of eggplants smiled and said, "The backbones of the scholars of spring and autumn are crooked. I want to straighten them out. The martial artists of spring and autumn use their power to restrict. I want to destroy thousands of secret manuals, put reins on them, and turn wild dogs into domestic dogs. I want to teach the world in the next few hundred years, there won't be any Jianghu green-robed men wielding swords, there won't be any Earth Immortal dynasty traveling to the North Sea and sunset at Kengwu, and there won't be any Daoist ascending to the heavenly gate on a crane." The girl Jia. Huang Longshi suddenly laughed self-mockingly. "In the past, Li Xiaoxin scolded me for thinking that I was righteous even when I farted. He scolded me well." The girl's stomach rumbled with hunger. The old man laughed and took her to the village. The Shen family did not know Huang Longshi's true identity and only thought that he was a mysterious celestial alchemist. In the past, Huang Longshi had pointed out the right path, allowing the Shen family of southern Tang to escape a disaster and leave behind this bloodline. Even the genealogy of the family's lifeblood was written by Huang Longshi himself. When the elders of the imperial family in the village heard that their benefactor had come to visit, they insisted on setting up a feast. However, Huang Longshi did not agree and only borrowed a kitchen and a jar of wine to be alone with his daughter, Jia. The old man personally cooked and fried a carp and a plate of eggplants. The old man did not eat much and only drank a few cups of wine before he became drunk. The room was dim and the candlelight swayed. The old man rested his head on the table with drowsy eyes. When he closed his eyes, his tears were faintly discernible. He murmured softly, "1,000 years of affairs with banana deer, I dream of butterfly dreaming of me?" Chapter 853. The little girl took off her warm mink hat and gently put it on the old man's head. She rested her chin on the table and looked at the sleeping old man, lost in thought. In the city, both sides were in high spirits. The world only left a line to form a sword. Luo Yang, the world's #1 devil, performed an unprecedented sword move in the celestial state. Song Nianxing's ears, eyes, nose, and nose were bleeding, but he kept his mouth shut. In the city, the broken swords were still intact. Under the support of the round sword embryo, six-sword chi as thick as an adult man's thigh stood between heaven and earth. There was a faint sound of bells and drums, melodious and surging. The line between heaven and earth was like grinding a millstone, and the gap was only the height of a person. Sand and pebbles were flying in the dark, but it still couldn't destroy the six-sword embryos on the spot. This time, the master of sword pool, who didn't put on airs, only changed into a new pair of plain green cloth shoes. At this time, the soles of the shoes made of many layers of white cloth were mostly worn out, which made Song Nianqing feel a little regretful. In this life, he focused on the sword Dao and never had any romantic feelings. He didn't know why he and the woman who married into sword pool had stopped at treating each other with respect. But for some reason, in the face of a great enemy and on the line of life and death, he remembered the night when he lifted her veil and her shy face under the candlelight. After so many years, he didn't know when she slowly became a frost-haired old woman, nor did he know when she made this pair of shoes herself. When they parted and took over the luggage that he regarded as a burden, he only thought it was natural for a woman to take care of the family. Now, he realized how good it would have been if he took over the luggage, called her nickname, and thanked her. Song Nianqing remembered many things in the past. When he was in the prime of his life, he carried 12 swords and went to the martial emperor city in high spirits to challenge the world's #1. When he left home, she didn't say much. She just smiled and helped him tidy his clothes carefully. She walked him to the door and stood there alone, not waiting for him to turn back. Later, when Song Nianqing returned home, he passed by her with a cold face. She wanted to say something but stopped. She just squeezed out a clean smile without any grievance. In the past, Song Nianqing had always been indifferent, so it was inevitable that he would feel a little gloomy. Why had he found such a dull and boring woman? How was she worthy of his sword? This fatal absent-mindedness should have caused Song Nianqing's accumulation of power to be thwarted. Unexpectedly, in that moment of absent-mindedness, for the first time in his life, he felt guilty. Song Nianqing only felt that his sword heart was as clear as glass in that instant. Outside the city, there were originally more than 100 sword pool swordsmen carrying huge sword sheaths on their backs. Before Luo Yang made her move, they had already begun to gallop around the city. Wherever they passed, flying swords would fly out of their sheaths and float in the air outside the city walls, stopping and not falling. Outside the city, there were already nearly 1,000 swords hanging in the air. The sword formation was majestic, the sword momentum vast and mighty. But the swordsmen of Sword Pool who had reined in their horses looked at each other in dismay. Because the swords hanging outside the wall had all fallen to the ground at the same time. Without the guidance of the Qi, the sect master seemed to have given up on the idea of using the sword formation. But this sword formation should be the sect master Song Nianqing's hidden 14th sword. With the sect master's temperament, it was impossible for him to choose to wait for death in the face of a strong enemy. Since the sect master had always regarded Wang Xianxia, the martial emperor, as the last opponent in his life, even if he encountered a rare strong opponent in the city, he would not end up like this. For a moment, the swordsmen who had stopped were at a loss and felt a strong sense of crisis. But when the swordsmen of Sword Pool successively perceived the increasing strong sword intent in the city according to their realm, they were pleasantly surprised. Song Nianqing lowered his head and took a deep look at his shoes. He smiled slightly, allowing the 6 wisps of sword qi to vanish in the millstone and the flying wood and rolling stones to hit his face. He gently stepped on the only intact street under his feet and heavily spat out a mouthful of turbid air. Finally, he could not suppress the blood surging in his throat and spat it out in front of him. Soon, it was covered by dust and disappeared. Song Nianqing said softly, "It's time to go to Jianghu for you." Song Nianqing stepped on the ground and began to run wildly. The last sword was also the last time he went to Jianghu. Song Nianqing himself was the sword. Song Nianqing's sword collided with Luo Yang's sword. Song Nianqing's clothes and skin seemed to have been cut into pieces and began to turn into a bloody mess. But this Sword Dao Grandmaster did not feel it at all. He laughed heartily and flashed across a green rainbow. He gave up the mighty sword formation of 1,000 swords in exchange for a sword Immortal's sword that seemed inexplicable to others. This sword could be said to be invincible in the world. It tore apart Luo Yang's heaven and earth. The world was dark and cloudy. Song Nianqing's sword qi was like a painting of an immortal riding a dragon. Song Nianqing himself could not be seen. Only the sword qi, lightning, clouds, and rain could be seen. Luo Yang, who did not expect Song Nianqing to have such a sword, held her breath and concentrated. Her qi circulated 800 miles in an instant. The three mystical powers of the Vajra finger and the mysterious celestial phenomenon fused together. It was obvious that she wanted to prove that Song Nianqing's fatal sword could not seriously injure her. In fact, when the two were still several feet apart, Song Nianqing was already on the verge of death. But the sword qi was still growing and majestic even when he was on the verge of death. Luo Yang pushed out with both hands. Her sleeves were torn and her hair fluttered in the wind. As if she was wrestling with a dragon, her feet kept slipping back. At this critical moment, outside the city, a bolt of lightning exploded into the city. It was so fast that when the lightning entered the city, two riders of the sword pool were lifted off the ground and flew into the city. The lightning broke through the wall, but the two swordsmen and their horses crashed into the wall that was as tall as a person. With two bangs, they turned into two pools of blood. They did not have the strength to fight back and died on the spot. Luo Yang turned her head to look to the east with difficulty. There was a trace of unwillingness and anger in her eyes. The lightning, which was well versed in the resonance of heaven and earth and was thus well hidden, arrived in the blink of an eye. Luo Yang did not expect that Song Nianqing would risk his life to use the sword Immortal sword. She also did not expect that Lu Haoshi would point his spear at her from the beginning, instead of the guy who wanted to kill her in the Liang imperial court. Luo Yang gritted her teeth. The two blue and red fish tried their best to reveal a small part of their ethereal body, trying to block Lu Haoshi's timely sneak attack. A white shadow rushed to Luo Yang's side almost at the same time as Lu Haoshi, forcibly withstanding the full force of the celestial state's attack. Even if this reckless guy only won a blink of an eye, Lu Haoshi had already brushed past Luo Yang and the sword qi. Lu Haoshi was furious. After weighing the pros and cons in his heart, he did not chase after the white-clothed devil who had lost the best opportunity to severely injure him. Instead, he rushed toward the little bastard who ruined his good plan. From the center of the city to the west of the city, the back of the figure crashed through many walls. In front of the last wall, Lu Haoshi's 5 fingers formed a hook, as if grabbing something from the body of the person, while his other hand punched out, smashing the guy from inside the city to outside the city. With a cold face, Lu Haoshi crushed the qi in his hand, which was faintly visible like a lotus swaying in the wind. He sneered, "You overestimate yourself. You dared to ruin this old man's plan of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. This old man not only wants you dead, but also wants you to lose everything before you die." The ear-piercing scream of a woman came from inside the city. It was so sad that it made Lu Haoshi's heart palpitate for no reason. Chapter 854. There are 2 more chapters for today. A person suddenly broke through the wall and left the city. The swordsmen who had just picked up their swords from the sword pool outside the wall were startled. After recognizing the young man's unfamiliar face, they felt relieved. At first, they thought it was the top 3 swordsmen in the world who had been beaten out of the city. This time, they had left the sword pool in full force. A small group had followed Li Yibai to the Swift Snow Mountain Villa, while a large group of elites had followed the sect master on a secret mission. When they got close to the city, they took turns to pass a portrait. The sect master's order was simple and comprehensive. If they saw the person in the portrait, they would be killed without mercy. The nearby swordsmen on horseback also quickly gathered around. As the sword sect's unique sword-flicking mystic skill sounded, more and more swordsmen rushed over. The person in the portrait seemed to be seriously injured. After struggling for a while, he still could not stand up and sat on the ground. His face was haggard and his complexion was obscure. It was obvious that he had fallen into a miserable state where his soul, essence, qi and spirit were violently fluctuating. He did not pay attention to the swordsman of Sword Pool who had shrunk the encirclement. He clenched his fists and stared at the old man in embroidered clothes on the other side of the hole in the city wall. He had lived a comfortable life in the most virtuous city in the world all year round and held a high position. The old man's aura was strong. The difference between the aura inside and outside the city was obvious. In the dim light, Master Lu Hao, who was not inferior to the young man in the north, slowly walked out, making the people of Sword Pool feel suffocated. Only a few people with the best cultivation of swordsmanship managed to stop their mounts from retreating. Most of the swordsmen involuntarily followed their horses and retreated. Master Lu Hao sneered in his heart. This kid had been shrewd and sneaky for more than 20 years. He even managed to leave the great peace city alive. He did not expect that he would get carried away, and in the end, he could only seek his own death. If he had not blocked the side of the female devil, Master Lu Hao could have cooperated with Song Nianqing's Earth Immortal sword and seriously injured the new leader of Zhulu Mountain. If this kid had been smarter, he would have fled the city earlier and allowed Luo Yang to hold him and Song Nianqing back. Although there was a slim chance of survival, there was still a slim chance of survival. Since this kid did not want to die, Master Lu Hao would not be courteous to him. During the 4 to 5 li journey, Master Lu Hao, who was a master of celestial state, not only dispersed the kid's vigorous qi that was desperately protecting his body, he also took the opportunity to pull out the half-opened big yellow lotus from his dantian. This was an unexpected surprise. Even Master Lu Hao, who was used to seeing storms, could not help but laugh to the sky. He had worn out his iron shoes to search for something, but found it without any effort. Back then, he had failed to kill that female sword immortal in the capital. All these years, he had been unable to eat or sleep in peace. Now, not only was Lame Su's lifespan almost up, if he could kill this young man who should have died in the womb back then he would have no more worries. The Lu family of Nanyang, who worshipped him as their ancestor, might not necessarily be unable to surpass him and become a new noble family that rose after the smoke of war. Lu Haoshi walked from the inside of the city to the outside of the city. From the moment he took away the golden lotus that was the foundation of the Great Yellow Court, he did not stop for even a moment. His hands that came out of his sleeves were constantly and secretly tapping his fingers, completely tearing apart the qi around the young man so that he could no longer create a new climate. The two great masters of Great Peace City, Han Diaosi was in the open while Lu Haoshi was in the dark. Their identities were completely different and their methods were completely different. However, there was one thing that they were very similar, and that was that they were too lazy to care about the righteousness of Jianghu. They were very practical, just like the political skills of the blue-eyed Zhang Julu. Lu Haoshi was not indecisive because of his identity as a senior, and did not let his guard down because victory was in his grasp. He watched as the white-haired young man's qi gradually faded under his fingers. Lu Haoshi's eyes burned with passion, as if he had opened a jar of wine that had been in the cellar for more than 20 years. Su Fengnian struggled to stand up, but Lu Haoshi, who was watching coldly from the side, kicked him in the air. It was as if he had been kicked in the face, and he fell back a few feet. Lu Haoshi continued to move forward. Every step he took seemed to be very casual, but in fact, it would affect the weather of heaven and earth. As he stepped heavily on Su Fengnian's body and chaotic qi, Lu Haoshi calmly said, "The otherworldly item that helped you in Great Peace City swallowed the purple gold qi of the first heavenly master of Dragon Tiger Mountain at the Spring God Lake. Right now, it is full and has not finished digesting it. It is at the moment when its yin and yang are alternating. Since you want to use it as a trump card to deal with this old man, then you should obediently avoid it and obediently act like a grandson. Why did you help the woman of Zhulu Mountain take that blow from this old man? Even if it could endure for a few more hours, it would still be better than this situation. It could only watch helplessly on the side as it suffered together with you. It could only continue to instill cultivation into you in a futile attempt to prolong its life, allowing this old man to step on both your body and its soul. Although this old man has killed countless people in his life and has countless famous experts, it is still the first time he has killed a celestial phenomenon expert so casually by working together with that human cat. How interesting." Lu Haoshi continued to move forward step by step. Every step he took, Su Fengnian would let out a muffled sound, and a cloud of dust would rise. Lu Haoshi stopped and stomped heavily on the ground. Su Fengnian's body immediately sank into a large pit. The swordsman from Sword Pool, who had taken the initiative to move away, only saw a hand at the edge of the pit. It was covered in blood, and it was unwillingly reaching out inch by inch. Lu Haoshi, who was cautious by nature, sent a secret message to Shermu. He smiled and said, "I heard that you, the crown prince of Beiliang, rushed to Beimang alone. Along the way, you killed many people, including Xie Ling and Diwu Raccoon. When you returned to Liang, during the assassination at Iron Gate, which affected the situation in the capital, even Yang Taisui was killed by you. You must be very smart, but how could you, with such a smart brain, take the initiative to be kicked by a donkey? For a she-devil of Beimang, who has no relatives or friends, you even gave up the hereditary position of the king of Beiliang? You don't even want the 300,000 iron cavalry of Beiliang?" Lu Haoshi twisted the tip of his foot, and blood splashed out of the hand that reached out of the pit. The old celestial phenomenon expert sneered and asked the third question in a sinister tone. "You don't even want to avenge your mother?" Chapter 855. Su Fengnian could almost only hear the sound of his own heavy breathing. Lu Haoshi's 3 questions caused his eardrums to vibrate, and it was as if a bell was ringing in his heart. Su Fengnian did not dare to cut off the telepathic connection with the red-robed otherworldly item. It was not because he was afraid of death, but because he was afraid that Su Ying would be stubborn and die before him. After breaking the wall and falling to the ground, he had a hidden thought. He hoped to use the opportunity to temper the purple-gold fate in Su Ying's body. Not only could he stall for time, but he could also let Su Ying recover her realm in advance. Unexpectedly, Master Lu Hao was a cunning old fox. Every step he took was full of mysteries. He only hurt Su Ying's skin but not her skin. He was indeed the old tortoise who had been hiding for the longest time in the celestial state. Su Fengnian turned over and lay flat in the pit. He forcibly cut off his connection with Su Ying's spirit and looked at the gray sky. His vision was blurry. Ever since he picked up the saber again, as long as he was determined to achieve something, he would advance step by step. He was afraid of death, so he did everything he could to cultivate the saber and nurture the sword. After reaching the first rank of Vajra, he obtained the Great Vajra, Pseudo-Finger Mystery, and used all his fate to enter Pseudo-Celestial State. He stumbled his way up and fell again and again. There were gains and losses, and he did not even have the time to be complacent. Now that he suddenly looked back, he realized that he had achieved many feats that he did not even dare to imagine before he started practicing the saber. Su Fengnian slowly closed his eyes and thought of something Su Shao said. No one deserved to die from the beginning, and no one could not die. Su Fengnian's mind suddenly flashed with a picture of the spring god lake that he desperately wanted to remember but could not. Su Fengnian, whose consciousness was blurred, was instantly immersed in it as if he was in the picture. It was a boundless autumn with golden wheat as far as the eye could see, and a gentle breeze blew. On a small path, there was a woman walking in front. She stretched out her slender hand and gently brushed the wheat, leaving an unforgettable back view. Su Fengnian's body somehow had a lofty feeling that the great Qin kingdom was destined to last forever. Su Fengnian looked down and held a heavy wheat in his hand. He suddenly raised his head, and the woman happened to turn her head. Just as he was about to see her face, the picture suddenly shattered and everything disappeared with the wind. He reached out to grab her, but the harder he tried, the more he failed. He only heard 2 words with a strange accent and yet contradictory as if he had heard them thousands of times. Huang Longshi, who was clearly dead drunk, slowly opened his eyes. The candlelight burned and occasionally made a faint sound like soybeans cracking. His daughter had long disappeared. The old man sighed in his heart. After he was chased out of the Shangyin Academy, he had told the emperors and ministers of the Spring and Autumn Kingdom countless hateful things. Unfortunately, they all loved to listen to him and were intoxicated. However, he had finally found a daughter who was willing to listen to him speak the truth, but she did not like to listen to his nagging. Huang Longshi poured himself a bowl of wine and took a sip. He picked up a very tasty braised carp with his chopsticks. Of all the flavors, spicy was the most important. If it was not spicy, it would be tasteless. This time, He acted as a matchmaker for Zhulu Mountain and West Chu. He acted as the middleman. Chao Changqing was the guest of Zhulu Mountain, while Zhulu Mountain provided money and manpower for the restoration of West Chu. He was busy, but it was only to delay the opportunity for the Zhao family to unify the world. Huang Longshi knew that everything he had done in this life was just to take advantage of the situation. Huang Zhentu, Wang Mingyan, Shenyuan Dandan, Li Chungang, Yang Taisui, Han Shengxian, Song Yanqing, including Lu Haoshi, Zhao Huangchao, Gu Jiantang, and so on, who most likely would not have a good ending. Counting with one's fingers, the older generation of Liang Jianghu seemed to have all died in one night. After the peace of the Central Plains, Huang Longshi transferred the fate of the world to Jianghu. The boiling water seemed lively, but it was nothing more than pulling up seedlings to help them grow and draining the pond to catch fish. The imperial examinations flourished. The imperial court, which revered only Confucianism, became more and more disciplined. The Jianghu, which was struggling at death's door, became more and more silent. The common people were at peace. Huang Longshi grabbed the mink hat from his head and glanced at the sunflower on the table. He smiled bitterly and said, "Daughter, why are you joining in the fun? I was still thinking that there was someone left who could clean my grave for me in the future." A young girl ran out of Xinjiafang, her raven hair slanted. Outside the small city of Liang that was not even worth mentioning, Luo Yang got rid of Song Yanqing a little faster than Lu Haoshi expected. This was usually negligible, but here it was enough to turn the world upside down. In the history of the world, there were only a few sword immortals who had become land immortals. Many sword immortals only had one sword or one move that reached the land immortal realm. Wei Chao, the sword immortal of the previous dynasty, was like this. Song Yanqing's sword was unstoppable. In Lu Haoshi's view, even Wang Xianji and Taoba would have a headache if they were to fight against it. Song Yanqing's sword was already at the peak of the way of the sword. Lu Haoshi had been influenced by Song Yanqing for a long time in the celestial realm. If he were to encounter it, he could only retreat. That year in Daoist City, the woman who had reached the land immortal realm was able to escape unscathed with that sword. It was enough to show the supreme power of the land immortal realm. Song Yanqing's sword that broke through two realms without any warning was undoubtedly a great harvest for Lu Haoshi. It also made Su Fengnian and the woman in white suffer. In Lu Haoshi's original plan, since he had sensed the existence of Luo Yang, he could only take advantage of the situation. After entering the city, no matter if he killed or seriously injured Su Fengnian, he could only retreat after one attack. Lu Haoshi admitted that he had no chance of winning against Luo Yang, who could combine the heaven and earth into a single line of sword. It was the same when he met her before. However, after she took Song Yanqing's sword without hesitation, Lu Haoshi did not think that there was such a big disparity between victory and defeat. The woman in white gave up the power of the sword that combined the heaven and earth and rushed to Su Fengnian's side. Her eyes were unreadable. Lu Haoshi, who was secretly drawing with his fingers, sneered, "Demon Luo Yang, who ranked fourth in the world, is actually so reckless?" Luo Yang, who had her back to Lu Haoshi, did not say anything. On the wall, a bright vermilion robe finally appeared. The otherworldly item held its head with its 5 arms and grabbed both sides of its face. Its sharp nails drew blood, and it was in so much pain that it could not make a sound. In the city, Song Yanqing, whose body was badly mutilated, staggered and sat on the ground. He reached out his trembling hands and struggled to take off his severely damaged cloth shoes. He gently held them in his arms and died in Jianghu. The black carp that Luo Yang relied on for survival had already dissipated in the sword energy in the city. Another red carp with long whiskers, which was also taken from Emperor Qin's mausoleum, appeared out of thin air. Luo Yang broke all of the dragon whiskers, and the dragon whiskers quickly merged into the blood vessels in her palm. Lu Haoshi suddenly shook his sleeves. Luo Yang in white seemed to be hit hard in the back. After shaking violently, she did not fall. She leisurely exhaled a mouthful of golden mist and said softly, "I won't wait anymore. What you gave me 800 years ago, I will return it to you today. From now on, there will be no Qin empresses or Luo Yang in this world." What will happen to you and her in the future? Luo Yang bit her thin lips and stopped talking. She let Lu Haosher's qi hit her back again and again. She exhaled the rich cultivation that she had accumulated for hundreds of years, which turned into a cloud of golden mist and filled Su Fengnian's body. Lu Haosher's face changed dramatically. Without hesitation, he began to retreat. Su Fengnian slowly stood up. His eyes were golden, and he stretched his body as if he was showing off to the world. Then, he quietly looked at the woman in white in front of him and said in a mellow voice, "Luo Yang?" The woman's figure gradually swayed and began to dissipate in the wind. Tears streamed down her face, but she bent down with a smile and pulled back her sleeves. It was just like the first time they met 800 years ago, when he had yet to proclaim himself emperor, when she was in the fields and had yet to enter the palace. Using a delicate voice that the devil Luo Yang would never utter, she softly called out, "Your Majesty." Chapter 856. In Xiangfan City, there was a graceful woman wrapped in silver like a fur coat. It was hard to imagine that 20 years ago it was a ghost city filled with a gloomy aura. She looked like a widow from a poor family who married into a rich family and suddenly changed her appearance. There was no trace of poverty, only the splendor of jewelry. A carriage slowly moved through a quiet and deep narrow alley. The horse's hooves clattered against the limestone floor, creating a series of crisp sounds. The coachman was a beautiful woman. She was called Apricot Flower in the Prince of Jing'an's estate. Everyone knew that she was young Master Lu's personal maidservant. As that blind young Master Lu's position in Xiangfan became more and more stable, her status also rose along with it. Even the head steward of the Prince of Jing'an's estate had to squeeze out a smile when he saw her. He was afraid that she might blow a pillow wind at young Master Lu's side. As for whether she really had intimate relations with young Master Lu, only the heavens knew. Who in the Prince of Jing'an's estate didn't know that young Master Lu was the #1 favorite of the young vassal king? Xinghua, a man of sacrifice whose real name was Lu Lingbao, carefully pulled up the curtain. Lu Su walked out of the carriage and pushed the door to the private courtyard. Xinghua could only wait outside the courtyard and did not dare to look at the courtyard door. There were 2 small courtyards. Originally, there were 2 begonia plants in the courtyard. However, begonia plants could not withstand the sunlight. The courtyard was dark and did not absorb the sunlight. One of them had already died. Lu Su went straight to the main room. Before he went up the stairs, he stopped. A woman who was guarding the door was frowning. When she saw Lu Su, she was first surprised and then happy. She quickly walked down the stairs and kept a good distance from him. She said respectfully and softly, "Greetings, young Master Su." Lu Xuan smiled lightly and bowed his head slightly. He did not lack etiquette. Although he disliked this woman of unknown origin and never hid it in front of the young lord, he would not make an enemy out of her if he had to deal with her. There was a sound of porcelain smashing on the ground. Lu Su looked up at the main room and frowned. Since Zhenwu the Great stepped on the boat at the Spring Lake, the king of Jing and returned to Xiangfan City in a daze. He had not shown up for many days. Many important political affairs that needed to be annotated by the Lord were delayed. Although he was worthy of the title of the most intelligent person in the Jing'an palace, it had always been taboo for counselors to overstep their boundaries. The woman sighed and said, "Young Master Lu, please come in and persuade him. His Highness has only been drinking ever since he came back. He has eaten nothing." Lu Xuan nodded and walked up the stairs. The woman followed him closely. She was dignified but charming. She looked like the princess who died with the king of Jing'an. She gently pushed the door open for Lu Su. In the room, Zhao Sun's hair was disheveled. He was sitting in the corner with his back against the wall. Dozens of wine jugs were rolling around him. He smelled of wine and did not look like a lord at all. When he saw Lu Su, he felt guilty at first and then became angry. He picked up the wine jug with trembling fingers. The jug was empty. The young lord who was almost as famous as his father in Xiangfan City waited for a long time but did not get a drop of wine. He threw the wine jug and smashed the only remaining porcelain bottle on the shelf. Lu Xuan was blind but not blind. He was not surprised by Zhao Sun's depression. His Royal Highness had not experienced many twists and turns in his life. After he became the new king of Jing'an, his life was smooth. However, when he was on his way to the top, his dignity was trampled on by the enemy he hated the most. Lu Su did not comfort him. Instead, he turned around and took a new wine jug from the woman. He sat opposite Zhao Sun and handed it to the young lord who only dared to hide and drown his sorrows in wine. When he heard the woman's footsteps and the sound of the door closing, he said slowly, "Crown Prince Bailiang is really the reincarnation of Zhenwu Great Emperor. That is a good thing." Zhao Sun, whose eyes were cloudy, was stunned for a moment. Then he regained some clarity. He took the wine jug and stopped drinking. Instead, he stared at the true backbone of Xiang Fan. Lu Su said calmly, "Back then, the theory of yin-yang and 5 elements was popular in the Shangyin Academy. Huang Sanjia claimed that Liang, who had the fire element, was going to unify the world. The nemesis of fire was water. Bailiang ruled the northwest and had the Wudang mountain which worshipped Zhenwu Great Emperor. It was said that 800 years ago, Zhenwu Great Emperor came to the world and became the emperor of the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty originated from the southern border of Bailiang. This was the reason why the imperial astronomer instigated the case of the white clothes in the capital. For the emperor who did not care about the common people and ghosts, he would rather believe in the change of the dynasty and the change of the 5 elements than not. The old lord is the adopted son of Wang Xinji of the emperor of War City. There was also the disturbance of Zhenwu Great Emperor coming to the world at the Lake of Spring. I don't believe that the emperor can sit still. I believe that Wang Xinji can ignore the imperial edict, but I don't believe that Wang Xinji can resist the temptation of fighting with Zhenwu Great Emperor. What other competition in the world could be more suitable than the battle with God Yujing, who had walked down from the celestial heavens, as the finale? The imperial court can tolerate His Royal Highness who has already gained power, but it will never accept a king of Bailiang who has ambition and fate. Why don't you make a bet with me on whether Wang Xinji will leave the city in the near future?" Zhao Sun's eyes lit up. He did not care about the disrespect in Lu Su's words towards the royal family. He clapped his hands and laughed. "That makes sense. I won't bet, I'll definitely lose." Chapter 857. Lu Xuan stood up and patted the dust off. He said to himself, "A vassal king has been drinking for a few days. What a scandal! You are not afraid of being laughed at by Lu Su, but are you not afraid of being laughed at by women? I have only heard that men like to puff themselves up in front of the women they like, but I have never heard of a man pretending to be a coward in front of a woman." Zhao Sun smiled in relief, but he was still a bit embarrassed. Fortunately, the blind scholar could not see it. Zhao Sun put down the flagon and stood up abruptly. He straightened his messy clothes. Outside the house came a man's deep voice and suppressed coughing. Zhao Sun hurriedly opened the door. He did not even look at the face of the prince's mansion's men of sacrifice. He directly took a section of the secret letter that was secretly delivered to Jing and Palace by a carrier pigeon. After opening it, his face turned red and his handsome face was so excited that it was twisted. He read the few words of the secret letter several times before he clenched it tightly in his hand. He turned around and walked quickly to hug Lu Su. He laughed and said, "Mr. Lu really can predict the future. He is not inferior to Huang Sanjia. He is out of the city." The woman standing far away in the courtyard secretly looked over and happened to see the handsome face of the blind man who seemed to have everything under control. She did not know why, but her intuition told her that Mr. Lu, who was smiling peacefully, was not smiling. In the Shen family square, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, smoke rose in spirals from kitchen chimneys and the sound of chickens and dogs. A Confucian in a green robe with white hair on his temples walked in. He looked elegant and graceful. When he was young, he must have been a handsome man who could make many women fall in love at first sight. He stood quietly under a row of lush feng shui trees at the entrance of the village, as if he was looking for someone. Huang Longshi walked out of the house and looked at each other. Huang Longshi hesitated for a moment but still walked toward the old man in green robe. They stood together at the entrance of the village. The curved river gurgled. The scholar in green robe chuckled and said, "A few years ago, I secretly looked through the Shen family's genealogy records. Your handwriting is still the same as when you were studying at the Shangyin Academy. This time, I guessed that you would most likely appear here, so I came to try my luck. The corners of Huang Longshi's mouth twitched. How could I have disturbed you? The West Chu Empire is on the verge of being reinstated. There are so many things that you, Chao Changqing, have to personally attend to. I know. So it's old monster Wang who has left Martial Emperor City and returned to the Jianghu. But since it was this old monster who was going to deal with that pitiful worm, even if you, Chao Zhangqing, were a saint, you still wouldn't be able to stop him. Unless Deng Tea returns from the Eastern Sea, and if he is willing to join hands with you to resist the enemy. However, if you really anger Wang Xianji, no matter who he wants to kill, even the Heavenly King can't do anything about it. Even such a monster that appears only once every 500 years is qualified to fight with Ancestor Lu. Chao Changqing smiled and asked, if I join Luo Yang, we can't protect Su Fengnian? Huang Longshi shook his head and said, something happened over there. Song Yanqing used the Earth Fairy sword. I thought his last 14th sword was at most a celestial phenomenon. I didn't expect him to have cramps. Master Lu Hao seized the opportunity and was very clever. Luo Yang was careless this time. If you want that kid to be safe, you can only hope that he won't have cramps like Song Yanqing and invite the Zhenwu Great Emperor's Dharmakaya after the Spring God Lake. Otherwise, even if Wang Xianji's original intention was to give face to the Zhao family's son and go out of the city to put on a show, he might be itching for a good fight. But it's easy to invite a god but hard to send one away. Not to mention that this kind of fake immortal can't withstand Wang Xianji's full attack. Even if Wang Xianji let him go, he would still make that kid lose a layer of skin. From my point of view, it's possible that someone around him will die. Boyang? Su Longxiang? Or Su Shao? Chao Changqing sighed and said, why does it sound like Zhenwu's reincarnation doesn't have any benefits? Huang Longshi sneered and said, it's a broken business that's destined to lose money. Look at that kid in the past 20 years. Who around him has it easy? If there's really such a thing as the reincarnation of a celestial being, then Zhenwu's incarnation of the Great Qin dynasty 800 years ago was born. Now, not to mention Zhenwu Great Emperor, even if the three old masters sitting in the Three Pristines Hall came down to the mortal world, they wouldn't be of any use. Because it's against the law of heaven, they would still be suppressed by the Zhao family. Only after 300 years and 14 years later, will. Chao Changqing smiled and asked, will what? Huang Longshi sneered and said, you'll know when you live for another 300 or 400 years. Chao Changqing smiled and said, no matter what happens in the next few hundred years, living in the world, there are many things in the present that we should do our best without going into a dead end. Then, in the end, we'll still have a clear conscience. For the first time, Huang Longshi asked someone else a question, what about the girl that Li Chenggang likes? Chao Changqing joked, even you can't predict? Huang Longshi said indifferently, there are many people that I can't predict. Chao Changqing sighed and said, the Shenwu city's killer cat, the princess and I were watching the battle. If it wasn't for the sword that went to the Shenwu city, there would be another sword that fell from the sky. Huang Longshi said, we're just a wild old man's words. As for the Jianghu, it's just a dying flash. Chao Changqing laughed it off. A tall and sturdy old man with a head full of white hair did not take the flat road. Instead, he chose to go deep into the mountains and forests where there were few people. He only slowed down slightly when he was near the city, but he was still far faster than a horse. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes stopped for the first time since he left the city in the Eastern Sea. A beautiful young woman pressed her hands on the hilt of an ancient sword that was inserted into the ground. She blocked the path of Wang Xianji from the Shenwu city. She only had the great Liang dragon sparrow. But she was facing the most powerful person in the world who had dominated the Jianghu for 60 years. Chapter 858. This chapter is a little late. The second chapter is before 12 o'clock. The third chapter is before dawn. The old man who had been in charge of the Martial Emperor city for 80 years looked at the great Liang dragon sparrow from the sword tomb of the Wu family and nodded. Needless to say, with just this sword he was qualified to challenge Wang Xianji's sword. Jiang and I bit her lips. She would be lying to herself if she said that she was not nervous at all. She could not be nice to old man Li, who was wearing a sheepskin coat, because the senior who taught her calligraphy but did not practice swordsmanship did not have the slightest arrogance. Instead, he looked like an old man who liked to boast. She was not afraid of Chao Zhangqing, because in her heart, Chao Guanzi had always been that uncle she had seen in the West Chu imperial palace waiting for the imperial order when she was young. He was kind and amiable. She did not think much of Chao Guanzi's so-called outstanding martial cultivation of the Eight Dipper celestial phenomenon. But Wang Xianji was different. Even in the beautiful cage in the bitter cold Baoyang, she had heard of how the old man with the surname Wang suppressed all the heroes in the world. He claimed to be the second in the world, and no one dared to claim to be the first in the world to mock the whole Jianghu. He broke the wooden horse and ox, defeated Dong Tai, defeated Chao Changqing, defeated Gu Jianting. All the masters of Liang who were on the Wushu list had lost to this old man who never left the city. Old man Wang became a whetstone for the whole martial arts. How sharp the others were, they had to go to East Sea and Martial Emperor City to be sharpened to convince the masses. Countless Jianghu talents dreamed of fighting with old man Wang. Even if they lost in one move, they would be proud of it. The scariest part was that in the 100 years that Wang Xianji was in, the pugilistic world was filled with layers upon layers of mountains and giant peaks confronting each other. Various pugilistic world geniuses were born in large numbers and could be said to be endless. It was far from what the previous 100 years of pugilistic world could compare to. However, Wang Xianji was still unshakable and left the world behind. It was widely acknowledged that only the demon-slaying platform from 60 years ago, Qi Xuanzhen, could be compared to him. Unfortunately, after Qi Xuanzhen, another immortal from Taoism, Hong Shixiang, had just entered the pugilistic world and left. Therefore, Wang Xianji was still worthy of being called invincible in the world. Even Li Chungang, who had extremely high standards, admitted that even if he re-entered the realm of Sword Immortal, he would still be no match for the old monster Wang. Jiang and I hesitated and said, "Castellan Wang, Uncle Chao said that you are going to kill Su Fengnian." Wang Xianji's voice was loud and clear. He said calmly, "This old man had an oath with the late emperor of Liang. In this old man's lifetime, no matter if the king of Jing and Zhao Heng succeeded in seizing the throne or not, I have to ensure that this adopted son and his lineage will be rich and prosperous. Zhao Heng's death has a lot to do with Baoyang. However, this old man is not so despicable to get entangled with a junior. Otherwise, when the crown prince of Baoyang, Su Fengnian, carried a bowl and ascended the building, even if Dong Tai personally escorted him, it would not be so easy. This time, this old man left the city because he heard that Su Fengnian invited the Dharma image of the great emperor of Zhenwu at the Spring God Lake. Furthermore, a reclusive old celestial being from the Daoist sect came out of his body and brought a secret decree to Martial Emperor City. This old man has never had the chance to fight with Qi Xianzhu in his entire life. Coincidentally, he wanted to take this opportunity to witness the magnificence of a celestial being. Jiang and I wanted to say something but stopped. Wang Xianji smiled faintly and said with a pleasant expression, "This old man knows that your real name is Jiangxi. You are the princess of the fallen West Chu. You carry the great fortune from the great Qin dynasty to the West Chu. Your body's foundation is also excellent. Li Chungang is guiding you in the way of the sword, and Chao Changqing is sparing no effort to help you maintain your realm. That is why there is such a magnificent scene of a woman riding a flying sword today. To the Jianghu, it is not easy. This old man has been overseeing the Martial Emperor City for many years. Other than those who have no attachments and want to die, he has never destroyed a good talent in the Jianghu. The reason why Chao Changqing dared to let you block the way alone is presumably because he is sure that this old man will not make things difficult for you. This old man might as well be frank. The reason why I, Wang Xianji, am able to achieve what I have today is largely because Li Chungang did not hesitate to ruin his reputation and allowed me to break his sword, the wooden horse, and the ox. Furthermore, this old man entered the Jianghu because he was envious of Li Chuangang's famous sword. Jiangxi, since you are his disciple, this old man will not take the initiative to harm your life and destroy your realm. You can rest assured about this. However, how can this old man not see that your realm is unstable? Before you truly enter the land immortal realm, Every time you use the Earth Immortal's sword, it is a desperate move that will reduce your lifespan. Therefore, this old man would like to advise you. Since you know that you can't stop me, don't easily fight because of your personal feelings. This old man has watched the Jianghu in the Eastern Sea for more than 80 years, but only one female sword immortal, Wu Su, appeared. I really don't want you to die halfway. Jiang Si shook his head. Wang Xianxia smiled. This old man has never forced people to do things against their will. The reason why he said so much is mostly because of your relationship with Li Chungang. If you retreat without using a sword, you will definitely not be satisfied. It will also be detrimental to your sword heart. Jiang Si said seriously, I have 2 swords. Wang Xianxia laughed heartily. There was actually someone in this world who dared to bargain with him. He said in a clear voice, 2 swords is fine. Let this old man see if the disciple of Li Chungang and Chao Zhangqing will disappoint with the addition of the great Liang Dragon Sparrow. Jiang Si said methodically, this year, Uncle Chao secretly took me to the Wu family's sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool. I climbed up the Wu family's sword mountain filled with famous swords and also saw the deep pool with hundreds of thousands of ancient swords. Wang Xianxia was very experienced. After thinking for a while, he said, it is the superior sword way of seeing thousands of swords and then recognizing them. Chao Guanzi's spirit has always been rare. The sword way he taught you is naturally not ordinary. Jiang Si shook his head and said, at first, Uncle Chao had this intention. But I accidentally affected the qi in 2 places. Then I accidentally changed to a different sword way. But it is only a prototype now. Uncle Chao said that this move will become stronger when facing a strong opponent. If the opponent is not City Lord Wang, but an ordinary person, it will not be so powerful. Chapter 859. Wang Xianxia smiled and said, little girl, you don't have to explain to this old man so clearly. This old man can't wait for someone to seriously injure this old man. When Wang Xianxia said this, there wasn't the slightest bit of pretentious arrogance, because this was the principle of heaven and earth. Jiang and I blushed slightly and nodded. Jiang and I slowly closed her eyes. Her hands that were pressing on the hilt of the great Liang Dragon Sparrow sword floated up a few inches, and the famous sword was unsheathed. Wang Xianxia looked up at the sky, nodded and praised, interesting. Jiang and I, who had just raised her hands, suddenly pressed down, and the great Liang Dragon Sparrow returned to the scabbard. She lightly shouted, place your piece. Place a piece on the chessboard? Where was the chessboard? What was the piece that was going to be placed on the chessboard? The majestic old man's expression remained calm, but a strange light flashed in his eyes. He had actually underestimated this girl. In his eyes, the first move of unsheathing the sword and returning it to the scabbard could be considered a small matter, but what happened next had some great significance. The clear sky was instantly cut into countless crisscrossing ravines. Thousands of sharp sword qi raged in the sky. 2 mighty waves of sword qi, one from the Wu family sword tomb, the other from the Dongyue sword pool, like a black and white double line drawing a chessboard. With the sword qi as the line, with the sky as the chessboard, what a big move! Wang Xianxia instantly understood the subtlety of it. The little girl was right when she said that one would become stronger when facing a strong opponent. It was because the opponent was Wang Xianxia that the waves of sword qi from the sword tomb and sword pool came so quickly and densely. Wang Xianxia's smile deepened. She was really an honest and adorable girl. No wonder Li Chungang valued her so much. When Jiang and I uttered the 2 words, the sword qi in the sky was like a torrential downpour, falling down in unison. Furthermore, the falling was not without order, but all the sword qi was pointed at Wang Xianxia, so much so that it seemed like a majestic tornado on land. Wang Xianxia did not move, allowing the sword qi to pour down from above his head. However, the sword qi, without exception, was stirred up dozens of feet above his head. When the last sword qi dissipated, it was only 3 feet away from Wang Xianxia's head. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes did not move at all. Just like that, he withstood all the ancient sword qis that came from thousands of miles away with only the vigorous gang qi that flowed out of his body. Wang Xianxia looked at the pale-faced young woman and said calmly, indeed, it is still in its infancy. This old man is looking forward to the scene of you attracting two real sword mountains like a swarm of locusts. Wang Xianxia sighed in her heart. This woman actually had the aura of becoming the master of all the famous swords in the world. How many years had it been since he felt that the younger generation would surpass him? Wang Xianxia said solemnly, Jiangxi, this old man is very curious about your second sword. Su Fengnian's phoenix eyes, which were originally slightly feminine, turned into a strange golden color. His entire person seemed to have the aura of a monarch. He reached out his hand and grabbed Luo Yang, whose body and soul were unstable. He chuckled and said, As long as I don't die and I don't let you go, where can you go? 800 years ago, the necromancer who went to the sea to visit the immortals had already asked for an elixir of immortality. However, you secretly destroyed it. Do you think I don't know? I just don't want to argue with you. After saying that, Su Fengnian ignored the astonished Luo Yang. He turned his head and shook his head at the otherworldly item in the red robe on the wall. The otherworldly item instantly quieted down. Su Fengnian pressed his forehead with one hand and closed his eyes. Then, he opened them again and cleared his mind. He smiled and said something contradictory, I'm really me. Everything comes from the same origin. I can't escape from the fate of being alone. After the time it takes to burn an incense stick, will I still be me? Will you still be you? He pulled Luo Yang, who was crying and laughing unknowingly, and carried her on his back. Then he strode forward and chased after Lu Hao, who had fled when he saw that the situation was not good. After a few blinks of an eye, he caught up with the guard dog of the Zhao family, who was said to have been at Celestial Phenomenon for 50 years. Su Fengnian almost ran side by side with him. He smiled and said, Lu Hao, you were very impressive when you asked 3 questions just now. Lu Hao instantly drifted more than 30 meters away. He shouted in horror and anger, Who are you? The golden eyes of Su Fengnian slightly narrowed his eyes and smiled. The capital of the small country where ancestor Lu lives has been shot into a hedgehog by Great Qin's crossbows. If Great Qin's elite soldiers don't die, they will destroy you all. Lu Hao was so angry that he laughed. Su Fengnian, are you crazy? The reason why people in Jianghu were polite to those monks and nuns was because they were afraid of their strange hands. It was the same reason why swordsmen were afraid of encountering a new sword. Unless one was an expert in martial arts, no one dared to say that they would not fail miserably at such an easy task. Lu Hao had guarded the imperial palace for 60 years and read all the martial arts manuals. It was not wrong to say that he was a frog in a well, but the well itself was almost as wide as heaven and earth. Lu Hao had seen too many amazing moves. He did not dare to be arrogant just because he had stayed at Celestial Phenomenon for a few decades. That year, when the young leader of Wudong entered and left Great Peace City as if there was no one there, he and Han Diaosi quietly watched from afar. After weighing the pros and cons, they did not even have the desire to make a move. This year, Mount Longhu had another Zhao Ningxian, who was said to be the reincarnation of the first ancestor. However, Lu Hao's cautious nature did not mean that this old celestial phenomenon expert was a pushover. Killing a first-rank expert who was unwilling to fight to the death had always been as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Lu Hao returned empty-handed because he felt embarrassed. He felt that Su Fengnian was very familiar with unorthodox methods and was not easy to deal with. Su Fengnian was like a maggot in a corpse. He did not let Lu Hao pull away and asked with a smile, It is said that the strong are bold. Why are you, a celestial phenomenon expert, so cowardly? The sky above them was originally blue and cloudless. First, there were clouds, then dark clouds. Lu Hao did not say anything as he flew. Su Fengnian glanced at the sky and stopped. Lu Hao, who was like a stray dog, also stopped. His face was gloomy. I heard that there is a sword formation called the Thunder Pool, but how can it compare to a real Thunder Pool? To deal with an otherworldly item like you, it is very effective.